Okay, yeah. So this is right.
Yes, yes.
We have to put it. You're right there.
Yep.
Got it. You're in the second seat.
But you can also feel more comfortable sitting on, I had concerned that I put it behind you. I don't know if you have it or not.
Now, also two members, good morning. If you all want to mask, we do have a mask available. If you come to, you have a order or something, right, but you don't have one, you do have that. Absolutely.
Then you won't be able to hear us talk. No, maybe it'll make it quicker.
No, we need y'all to talk. The more y'all talk, the less time I. Yes. Let me say, we're going, before we get started, we'll make sure that if you are not, sitting 6 feet apart, we are recommending very, very graciously, but very, very graciously, strongly, but very graciously, to please, you heard me, thank you. Please wear a mask. If you are not sitting, we do have enough space where you can sit. But if you're not, we're asking you deliberately and graciously to please wear a mask.
You said that very graciously.
Thank you. Now you make sure you tell your president.
Oh, good luck on that one.
Good morning, everyone. We have 8:30, so I'd like to hereby call to order the regular Escambia County Planning Board meeting for August 4th. We do have 7 voting members, so we do have a quorum. I'd ask everyone at this time to please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Play ball.
That's $5 to the donut fund, Larry. All right. Good morning, everyone. Staff members, do we have proof of publication?
Yes.
All right. Does that publication meet all the requirements, legal requirements?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Chair will entertain a motion to waive the reading of the legal.
So moved.
Motion, second.
Second.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. You've been previously provided with the meeting minutes for the prior meeting. Is there any additions, deletions, or corrections to those meeting minutes? Hearing none, Chair will entertain a motion to accept.
Moved.
Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Board members, members of the public, you've been previously provided the hearing package for August 4th, 2020. The chair will entertain a motion to accept that hearing package and the legal advertisement into evidence.
So moved.
Motion. Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right. Like we typically do, we will go ahead and go directly into public hearings, and we'll come back to our follow-up and action reports.
Chairman,
Yes.
I just want to take a second real quick to introduce our new employee,
Okay.
Rachel. She's our new admin assistant. And so I will be training her, and hopefully she'll be taking over.
Not run away.
Yeah, oh God, yes. So, yes,
Taking over for your spot?
yes.
Oh,
It's time that I step fully into my new role.
which
So,
is?
admin supervisor.
Okay, congratulations.
Thank you.
She is good.
Rachel?
Rachel, good morning. If you just want to tell everybody a little bit about yourself, just so we know your background. Don't be shy.
She wasn't prepared for that one.
My name's Rachel Merlin. I've lived here my whole life. I really was not prepared for this question, so I am so sorry.
How long have you been with the county?
I started 1 week ago.
Okay, all right, good deal.
But yeah,
Okay, well, welcome. This is a good group, even though sometimes it's a little contentious, it's always a good group, so welcome.
And Mr. Brisket, if I may, also too,
You'll have to speak in the microphone, we can't hear your muffled voice through.
also too, I know that some of you all may have met her or you may not. We're so glad to have our new Assistant County Administrator. She gonna get mad at me doing this, but I always like to respect my superiors. Ms. Debbie, she's with us on this morning.
Good morning, welcome to you as well. You got one of those fun jobs. All right, well, we're gonna go ahead and go directly into public hearings. Our first public hearing is agenda item 6A, a public hearing concerning the review of ordinance amending LDC Chapter 4 regarding recreational vehicles, that the board review and make a recommendation to the BCC for adoption of an ordinance amending the Land Development Code to expand the use of recreational vehicles as living quarters, establish related use standards, and modify related provisions. And who is our presenter today on this? Griff, good morning.
Over here. Good morning, Griff Hickory, planner with Development Services. So this ordinance you saw last month in a draft form, and you just had a general discussion about it. I don't know that all of you were here, but it's coming to you today as an ordinance. I don't know how you would like to proceed. I can just give you again another overview and go from there, and then if you have questions. All right, so we're dealing with recreational vehicles, and we're not changing the current definition of recreational vehicle. It's probably worth telling you what the code says a RV is today. Current language is a recreation vehicle is a motor vehicle primarily designed as temporary living quarters for recreational, camping, or travel use, in which either has its own motive power or is mounted on or drawn by another vehicle. Recreational vehicles include travel trailers, camping trailers, truck campers, motorhomes, private motor coaches, park trailers, and other vehicles as defined in Florida statutes. The current definition goes on to say that for the purposes of floodplain management, a recreational vehicle additionally is one built on a single chassis, 400 square feet or less when measured at the largest horizontal projection, and designed to be self-propelled or permanently towable by a light truck. So the floodplain management provisions focus in on a little more specific attributes of an RV. That's what we currently have in the code. This ordinance came about as a desire to add provisions for where RVs could be used. And the ordinance, as you see it today, starting at the bottom of page 1, line 28, we're in the outdoor storage section of the code. These are simply in the order that they appear in the code. So this is a very minor change that really precedes the bulk of the changes. On page 2, there beginning line 9, we're talking about outdoor storage associated to residential uses, and there on lines 14 and 15 are where the change occurs. It's my understanding the request for this came about from code enforcement. As you see, the current requirement for recreational vehicle storage with accessory to a residential is that the vehicle be the property of a person residing on the premises, and code enforcement felt like, I guess, that was unnecessary and too difficult to follow up on. So that's just a minor change. Again, you're seeing it first simply because it appears in the code in that order. The bulk of the changes proposed begin on page 4. same chapter, the Chapter 4 of Location and Use Regulations, Section 4710. You see this struck paragraph beginning there on page 4, lines 6 through 12. That's mostly what the code says regarding RVs today. You can see there it represents some of the same language that's in the definition. Goes on to say that except under disaster recovery, temporary use provisions, that the use of a recreational vehicle as living quarters for more than 14 days in any calendar year is prohibited except in duly licensed campgrounds or mobile home parks. That last provision has more to do with a citation of unlawful use, and that is not represented again or repeated or replaced in these provisions because code enforcement normally assigns times to remedy issues based on the individual circumstances. So if it's something that can be taken care of quickly, it's my understanding they may assign a short time. If there's a reason to believe it's going to take an additional time, then they manage that. So they may give them an initial time and then come back, see what's progressing. So that paragraph is really all that's said in the code today, really about use. What struck me is it said, okay, these 14 days outside of a campground or mobile home park, you can use them, but how and in what manner? So part of these provisions address that. And we can go through them. So there, beginning on line 13 is the new language. We try to address all of the potential uses there. So we go back to outdoor storage and really refer you to the provisions in the other part of the code we just looked at. But we also state that outdoor storage that's not associated with residential, then it relies on whatever the zoning is going to tell you regarding outside storage. So this would be where they're sold or typically stored with boats and other vehicles, often associated with mini storage, but it can be standalone facilities. That's all determined based on the zoning, so what outdoor storage could be. The second category, the largest category, and what's really probably the focus here today is use as living quarters. Again, the restatement that not more than 14 days in any calendar year outside of a campground, an RV park, or mobile home park. Then those uses are divided up. We have short-term use, meaning the 14, less than 14 or fewer days, and provide a little guidance there, namely that the RV complies with the use standards and it remains fully licensed and ready for highway use. There's a little explanation of what that means. Item B there on line 35 is what brought the ordinance to you today. This is a proposal for RVs to be used within District 5 under the conditions that follow there on page 5, items 1 through 6, beginning there line 1 through line 14. First, and again, this is only within Commissioner District 5, that they only be allowed if the zoning allows individual manufactured homes, that the parcel that they're placed on is not a lot or a parcel of a platted subdivision, that it is a lot of record. There's only one RV on the parcel. Number 5, the
Karen, would you scroll up, please, just so we can follow along? Thank you.
Number 5, the RV is the only RV occupied as living quarters on any contiguous parcels owned by the same property owner. And then the last one is that the RV is not located in those several listed hazard areas. Another proposed addition is item C, the ability to use an RV as temporary living quarters during the construction of a dwelling. That often comes to us as a request, and as I pointed out, that little paragraph we have in the code now doesn't even address it, so we're kind of without an answer for them. Here, we're talking about the building permit having been issued, and people either building their own home or wanting to be on the site to oversee or watch, while it's being constructed. Once it's constructed and there's a CO, the RV would fall under whatever applicable provisions regarding retaining it there, either stored or used as living quarters. Item D is a use that's already in the code. Just, again, the idea here was to lay them all out, and it directs you to the disaster recovery provisions that are already in the code. E is a list of certain standards of use when these RVs are used as living quarters outside of the campgrounds, RV parks, and mobile home parks, where they're otherwise allowed today. Just trying to, again, cover questions or concerns that might exist about the use of RVs. So they should have their authorization with them. That way code enforcement, if they have any concerns, it's there, and they know what the conditions of the authorization are. There's provision regarding setbacks, where to place the RV. We're looking to just say it should be the same setbacks that are applicable to the principal structure, other than for disaster recovery or the construction time provisions that have already been referenced.
She wants to speak on.
3 is just referring to connection of utilities if needed, for site preparation, whatever might be necessary, just again following a standard line of permitting for clearing, protected tree removal, those kinds of things. Any issues regarding stormwater, sediment control. And then 5 is just dealing with waste that might be generated by the RV.
Okay. Griff, would you go into a little more detail about issuance of the land use certificate? What's the procedures for that, for someone who wishes to do this?
Yeah. This is what. For someone, Horace Jones, for someone who wants to basically, in District 5, where mobile homes are allowed only, if someone wants to basically say, I have an RV, and I want to use it as a dwelling unit in D5, they will have to come to the Front County Planner. We will have to check the zoning, because we got to make sure that it's zoned properly. They present a site plan, because we got setback requirements that we got to look at. So once we get all that, we will issue them a land use certificate. It'll be inside the system. And once it'll be inside the system, if there's any complaint by code enforcement, or someone called code enforcement, they'll be able to say, hey, yes, I see where you got documented proof. This is location, this is where it is, and we're gonna lay all these things out on the land certificate form that we will be issuing. So they gotta come and see a Front County Planner in order for that to be done, because we gotta check to make sure that it's zoned properly and that it meets all of these requirements.
And that is true in all districts for the construction of a dwelling.
Yes, for the construction now, as it relates to, so let's say, on your question, Mr. Pierce, if someone do have a house that's under construction, and that's typical, we get this request all of the time. They say, well, I want to watch my house while it's being constructed. This ordinance will allow them to come in and get some type of, like we do for a permit, get some type of approval, because we got to make sure that the permit has been applied for, that the permit has been issued. And with that permit issuance in hand, with notation inside the system, they have to say yes for so many days after the issuance of the CO, you can live in that RV. Plus, you gotta get power to do that from the building inspection department. Once that completed, once they got the CO, the RV gonna turn the power off, and the RV gotta be, it can stay there, but it cannot be used as a single dwelling. And that can go in any zoning category, where a house is under construction, and they want to watch over the work. And that, we get that request all of the time.
Chairman, I got a question.
Yes, sir.
The 14 days in any calendar year, how easy is that to regulate? I mean, I'm assuming that would be your neighbors telling on you, or how are you going to enforce that?
That's a good question, Mr. Reed, and believe me, it is enforced because neighbors do watch, and they do call code enforcement, and code enforcement do go out there and they do an investigation, and so it is regulated. Terry Williams, the supervisor for the planning, front counter planners, then we tell them, you're gonna have 14 days, and that in any zoning district, you can live in an RV, so it is regulated because the neighbors will call code enforcement, indeed.
All right, Patty?
I have kind of a basic question. This is a census year, and districts may change boundaries after the census as we go back into creation of voting zones. So is there something in the paperwork that says where the boundaries are, District 5, and should that change, how would that be addressed?
It says specifically District 5. There are zoning maps, and we do have commissioners' maps as well. If there is a zoning district changes, all of those things have to be done accordingly, and we will have to get them with our GIS, and we could make sure everything is still correctly. But the code is specifically, we did not want to put no demarcation, because we know that zoning and boundaries do change. But that's what we said, specifically for District 5, only where mobile homes are allowed.
So
And
just as a
Horace.
follow-up to that question, if someone's in District 5 now and something changes and they're no longer in the district, would that kind of be a non-conforming legal use because they have the land use certificate?
I would not even call it non-conforming per se. They are vested with that right.
Okay.
So therefore, they have complied with the regulations of the ordinance in place at that time.
Got you, okay.
Does this have any impact on units that are already in place in the other districts? I mean, if they've been there for 15 or 20 years, are they impacted by this?
Let me put it this way. If they have been there, being used as a dwelling unit for more than 14 days, they are not in compliance with the current provisions of the Land Development Code. Because the current provisions is, it
Okay,
says
let
14 days.
me ask a question more specifically without exposing any particular owner. If you have a unit, and it's a pull-behind unit, and it's 20 foot, and it's located on a lake, or located on Perdita Key Drive, and it's really a camper, but it's in a slot, and it's been there for years, it's still got the hitch, what happens to them?
Again, if it's being used as a single family dwelling unit for more than 14 days, the key term is more than 14 days, they must comply with the time limitation.
Do you think any of those kind of examples exist today?
Let me put it this way. It does, because that's why code enforcement get calls to complaints on it. That's why, I mean, we get complaints, code enforcement gets complaints weekly, and Mr. Williams, we gotta tell them that all the time, so I'm quite certain there are some non-compliance out there in Escambia County. I'm quite certain there is.
In the spirit of it, it relaxes, it alleviates the current regulation. It just does so with sevenfold the words.
Yeah, It does, but this is only germane to District 5 only. This is only germane for removing the 14-day limitation, only applies to District 5 only at this time where mobile homes are allowed. We have discussed this, and this is how it was told to present it to this board at this time. And if there are some other changes, the Board of County Commissioners, once they come before them, they can direct staff to make those changes if there is a desire to do so.
Mr. Pyle?
They get around the 14 days if and only if they get the land use certificate correct in District 5 alone, correct?
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Follow up, Mr. Sammons, on your question, was the unit you're talking about possibly in a mobile home park?
I'm aware of more than one,
Okay.
and none of them, I'm pretty sure, having spent a lot of time in District 5, that those exist there too. But I'm aware of a couple, at least, in District 1. And I struggle, my experience, I've actually dealt with this in a manner of speaking personally, 25 years ago. And, you know, what happens is, you shake the tree with these kind of changes, and then it draws attention to them, and you put people in difficult situations. And I would argue that if something has existed for 20 years and they own the property, and I realize I'd be unique in this argument, that we somehow find a way to grandfather them in, at least as long as they own the property.
That would be, that is always there's always an opportunity for exploration on that. Even with some of the state definitions, all of that gotta be looked at. Now, they can have it on the site, no one is saying that. They can keep it their storage, but if they wanna use it for more than 14 days as someone living in it, that's when a 14-day limitation come in at. So, but for us, they having it on site and being the owner property, they can keep it there. But it goes back to the 14-day time limitation. So that's gonna always be explored. That's why we have to be with those issues. We have to be site specific, so we can really look at those issues and see what involved with those particular issues, Mr. Simon.
It almost seems, and I don't want to throw a fly in the ointment, but it almost seems like the District 5 language should pertain to all the districts regarding the land use certificate. Now, I don't, again, beat me down, tell me why I'm wrong, but it.
Mr. Powell, your concerns and the planning board concerns, they are noted, especially in this meeting. But again, all ordinances has to go before the Board of County Commissioners for final approval. So when it comes time for those discussions, I know they're probably gonna be listening through this tape, and so if they decide to make those changes, we'll be glad to bring it back and do those changes.
Mr. Ingwell?
Yeah, an example I have is for paragraph C on page 5 for the use during dwelling construction. So if I bought an empty lot in a nature trail and I wanted to build my own house there, I got the proper permits. I'm a slow builder. It might take me 5, 6, 7 years to build my house. I could live in my RV for 7 years in nature trail. Is that correct?
This is the thing. Of course, when it comes to there are time limitations for building permits. There are time limitations, so therefore, that's gonna be really contingent upon the building permits, the building department, and myself. We will have to address those on a case-by-case basis, because building, for a permit for a building inspection department, it says that you gotta show a good faith effort. If you're just sitting there, you're not doing nothing, the building inspection department will definitely get involved, and in that case, we'll have to see what the issues are and what the circumstances are, and we can proceed making that judgment based upon that specific circumstances or what we discover, what the building inspection department discover as we work together.
So
So
it
there are
could-
so many different scenarios that could happen. It's just hard to say yes when we don't know on different scenarios, because there are no clearly absolutes.
So with that said, I would tend to agree with Mr. Pyle as well with concerns about, looks like we're, it's cherry picking which parts of the code apply to which districts.
Mr. Engwell, I know this is a little bit off topic, but I would think in a case like that, specifically with something like Nature Trail, maybe the homeowners association rules would
Right.
kick in. That would be more of a civil issue than a county issue, but there may be avenues where the homeowners can prevent something like that from going on for a long period of time, so. But I understand your point, though, the underlying issue there, so. Another quick question, we brought up the issue of people living in campers or RVs in mobile home parks, and I know that's not part of this, but what is the current rules on that?
Decides to, or utilize this again, even though, and I know if it's non-conforming, they shouldn't be there in the first place, but that's the fact of the matter, apparently, that some of these places exist. It may give them at least an option to apply for the land use certificate, and say, listen, I've been there for, however long. I don't know, I just feel like I'm missing something, and it is, I understand that the District 5 specifically requested it, and I respect that, but I just, maybe it's not necessary just to call them out. All the power would be held within your right to review each land use certificate. And then, now tell me why I'm wrong. I may be missing something.
And that's, again, those are good questions, Mr. Powell. But we do want to understand this, that in my tenure, I have seen some structures that have not been too kosher, that may have an adverse impact on existing communities. So if you just say, making it open for a camper right now, again, if there's the desire to do this, you will have to be very, very careful, because you just don't want to bring any and all type of structures to it all over the place in subdivisions that don't have covenants. Sometimes they buy them because they like nice subdivisions as well. Not that these things are not nice. So that's what we have to look at it wholeheartedly. That's why if there's a desire to let this be the test case and get traction on it, we always come back and modify and fine tune ordinances. We'll be glad to do that if we can get this out the door and see how it operates.
So District 5, more rural, people
Absolutely.
aren't worried about it, in theory, as opposed to Perdido Key Drive or somewhere else where somebody utilizes it. But again, so I guess what we're doing is unfairly putting the burden on you to dictate by acceptance or denial of that land use certificate what's right and what's wrong.
Let me clarify that any use for living quarters, other than those for disaster recovery, which only come about after a declaration of emergency, those all require land use certificates. That's what's written in here. And they also follow those standards that are listed there at the end.
But the land use is that's what pushes you beyond the 14-day limitation, correct?
Right. No, I mean, it can be within that time, but particularly outside of the mobile home park, the campground or RV park. So
Okay,
through that process, you can confirm, using land clearing to set up, to locate the RV. Are they Do they need a utility connection? Do they need a septic tank? You know, can the vehicle they have provide their own waste storage and then travel off-site to dump? All those questions can be reviewed. That's the purpose, you know, and where is it going to be placed? Is it going to be right up against the property line? Well, no.
Okay, well, let me ask the question one more time, one more way. Is, say I have 5 or 6 acres and I live in Beulah. And a nephew of mine goes through a very difficult divorce. And he can't afford to live out on his own. So he buys a camper and puts it in a spot on my property or on my property in Beulah. And it stays there for several years while he goes back to college or goes back to school to educate himself. Is there an avenue, if someone does that, for him to be able to stay there? And why can't we put that in the rules?
This is the thing, Mr. Simon. Now, when you say the code allows for 14 days in the calendar year, time limitations to live resident. The RV currently, the RV can stay there, and he can live in it for 14 days. He can. Now, if we want to make that change across the board, again, the direction is right now with this draft. It's for District 5 only where mobile homes are allowed. And that's clearly true now, because mobile home may not be allowed in all areas. So again, if that is a desire, and on different scenarios, different cases, but in that particular case, going off to school, the RV can stay on his parents' house, on his parents' lot. If 14 days currently yet the rule, if there's a desire to make this, we will be engaging with the commissioners, and they could provide some input on those things.
Mr. Fears?
Other than the typical zoning differentials, do we have a precedent in the LDC of a regulation that is specific to a single district?
All over. Ball pits, land clearing debris facilities, C&D facilities.
But isn't that covered under the typical zoning?
And that's what this would be. As well, it just germane to a specific area. It's just for District 5, only as a test case to see how it will work.
But if I have the exact same zoning classification, District 1, this does not apply.
Absolutely.
So the district is the driver, not, and I'm asking, do we have a precedent of that in the LDC?
I'm just trying to think. I don't think, well, we do have specific notice requirements for certain type of uses. For certain type of uses, we do have different notice requirements. But at this time, Mr. Fair, I think there may be, but at this time I cannot think of that. But I will research that because I may get that question again. At this time, I can't think of any, but I will research that.
Chairman?
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I think where Mr. Fierce is going, if we regulate it to one district only, is there discrimination? Is there something that would cause a lawsuit from somebody outside of 5 that would cause us, the county, more money to defend it if we find a way, if we do this in only one district? Are we causing ourselves problems?
This has been discussed with our legal department. It has been discussed with them, and they're the ones to make sure that our ordinances, they are legal basis. So this can be challenged across the board. But we want to make sure that as far as we do run them by our legal department. So,
Forrest, I'm always good at on the spot. I wasn't privy to the conversation when this was brought up at the commission meeting. We keep discussing that one commissioner requested it. Was it that other commissioners do not want it in their district? Or is it that they're just trying to help Commissioner Berry because he asked? Because I think there's a big difference. I mean, if all of the commissioners don't want this in their district, saying, well, you can do it, want it in our area, that's a big difference than just trying to grant a request. So, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, blame it on me, but we just need clarification.
Mr. Brisky, as I stated before in other meetings on this particular issue, it came about, yes, it was a request. We did talk to the county administration, and it's my understanding that this is direction that we was asked to go in, that it has been discussed at different other levels, and this is direction that we tasked to go in. I cannot speak directly, I'm not privileged to internal discussion with them, but I did talk to the county administrator about this.
Okay.
If I can, it's the reason I asked my question about precedent before, because it is indeed the vein or spirit of this regulation, and it is approved, there is now a new tool in the bag for all commissioners. They can go back and cite a specific need or want in one single district and target something for their own district that is exclusive to that district, because now they'll have this on the book.
Again, Mr. Fierce, that's why there is legal counsel with Allison Rogers and her team and staff. They provide legal guidance for the board on these issues, those questions like that. So we just rely upon them to provide the legal guidance and the legal knowledge to the board.
Okay. Other questions, comments before we go into public forum?
Can our legal opinion, given an opinion?
Yeah, from a legal standpoint, we've looked at this and we do not have any direct concerns with doing this in just one commissioner district. As Horace stated, of course, any ordinance can be challenged, but we're not particularly concerned about this one or the precedent that it would set.
All right, let's go ahead and hear from some members of the public, and then we'll come back for more discussion. All right, at this time, we'll call Michael Bearden. Morning, sir.
Good morning, how we all doing?
Good. If you'll please state your name and address for the record.
Yeah, Michael Bearden, 11716 Chanticleer Court, Pensacola, 32507. I just have a couple questions about this. I had parents that lived in RVs for 7.5 years and literally put an RV hookup at my place so when they could come visit. This is when I lived in California. I say it softly because I hate that now. Anyway, they would come and visit. They lived in that 7.5 years, and they would come and stay with me for 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time. And with this ordinance having a 14-day limit, I couldn't allow them to do that. They would be breaking the ordinance, the law. And my concern is 14 days isn't a very long time. It can be easily transgressed and gone over. And my question is, why did we set the 14-day limit? Can it be set to 30 days, for example?
Since I have been with the county, and I've been with the county as a front county planner for over 20 years.
You're using my time.
April the 4th, 2000, when I started as a front county planner. And that has all, that 14-day time limitation, to me, was always
Pretty standard.
in there, yes, so.
Yeah, but it needed to be standard. That's the question. Can we set it? Because this is a very specific issue we're talking about here. We're talking about people living somewhere for a specific period of time. And I think the ordinance overall is a valid ordinance. But 14 days, I think, is invalid. I think we should consider making that 30 days, for example. And obviously, I'm not on the board, but I am a concerned citizen who sees people having this restriction put on. As one person questioned the fact that, wow, I've got no place to live, but I have an RV or whatever, and I've got a friend that's got a lot that doesn't interject on other people's property while I'm trying to get a new job, go to school, whatever. We're really affecting people's lives here, and we have to consider that. And I definitely agree about the concern with regards to the precedent we're setting with regards to just one commissioner's site rather than the others. If it's good for one, why isn't it good for the other? Let's make a vote and not let Jews in right now, but we'll let them in later, maybe. And this is that kind of precedence. And I don't like seeing any precedence that separates rules and laws from other people. And that's really my primary main concern. I totally understand the need for this kind of legislation, for want of a better phrase, but I think we need to be more careful with the restrictiveness of it. There are people, as was stated, that have been living in these kind of situations for years on the lot they've owned. Now, they may have neighbors that do or don't like it because they get in an argument, their dog bit their cat, whatever, but they've been there for years, thus the term and the need for what we call a grandfathered in. And are we going to, if we pass this legislation, go to these properties that have been living in that facility, that unit for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 7 years, 15 years, and say, you got to get out now? What do you mean get out? I've lived here forever. You're telling me I have to leave because you put a new ordinance. That's illogical to me, and that's restrictive on our rights, our civil rights, and our need to be able to live free and as Americans. So that's really my main concern. And that's understandable why. The 14 days I think is too restrictive, and the concern about grandfathered in with regards to people who've been there for longer periods of time. So other than that, have a good time, and it's your job, not mine. I just get to get up here and tell you what I think. Thank you.
Chairman?
Thank you, yes, sir.
I just want to make sure, Horace, at this point in time, right now, without this amendment, if you're living in more than 14 days, it is already against the codes, no matter what district you're in.
Yes,
So we're not changing the legality of if you're currently living in one somewhere else. If we don't pass this, over 14 days living in any district is illegal unless you are in a campground. Is that correct?
yes, sir. It is not in compliance with the land development code.
So all we're doing from this is adding that you can live in District 5.
Well, mobile homes are allowed.
We're not restricting anything else that is not currently restricted.
No, sir.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that I'm fully aware of that, but what my concern is the last time that I was involved in something like this, it drew attention, and people showed up at people's front doors. And I struggle with, if we're going to address this, I struggle with how to vote. I lean towards voting yes, because it at least allows something in District 5. But it feels like we're missing an opportunity to fix some things elsewhere too.
And as I said, we could, if there's some more, because I know that these things are being recorded, we definitely, because as I stated, the assistant county administrator is here, and she's hearing the concerns of this board. We definitely could talk further, but, and see if there's if they desire to come back and add some changes to this. That definitely can be noted, but this is just the first step in looking at this in this area.
Horace, I know we've asked quite a few questions, and this may be more suited for Kia than anyone. Has the county looked at fair housing laws when it comes, I know there was a change a few years ago when it comes to manufactured homes, RVs, and things like that with the federal fair housing standards. Has that been reviewed as well in the legal review?
We did review those generally, but not in the context of this particular ordinance.
Okay. And we'd feel like that this wouldn't put any kind of discriminatory issues out there for fair housing for someone who comes and says, this is all I can afford, and,
Yeah, we're not concerned about that being an issue.
okay.
I think it's worth remembering, these are not dwelling units. We don't redefine them as dwelling units. They're temporary living quarters. Because they're set up and they may be used indefinitely, they're still not dwelling units.
Right, but that's
They're
what
not
I'm getting at. I
structures.
believe that the feds put a designation on RV RVs and things like that, that they could be considered dwelling units, permanent dwelling units. That's why I was asking that question. It comes up in my line of work sometimes because we loan money on, things we have to be very careful about the fair housing laws. So that's the only reason I ask it. But I think it was maybe 2016, they changed the designation to allow them to be dwelling units, so. Okay, we have another speaker, Ms. Jacqueline Rogers. Good morning, Ms. Rogers. Please state your name and address for the record.
Jacqueline Rogers, 1420 Ridgeway. I agree with Mr. Bearden, and this is probably not in the ordinance, but I do think the 14 days is too little time. As a grandmother, I hope to stay at my kids' properties and travel around the country. So I'm not necessarily against what is being done here. I think being able to live on your property while you construct a home, that's a great thing, and that makes sense. I am concerned about it being district-specific. District 5 is diverse. Milestone and 9 Mile areas is not the same as north of where I live. So I think you shouldn't write a code because a commissioner particularly wants to accomplish something. It should be good for the whole county. And what I mean by that is, instead of making it district specific, could we make it, parcel specific, and it had to be a certain size of property or something like that? Because Beulah is semi-rural too. I know that's changing somewhat. But I just do think it's discriminatory. There are people that I know that were not allowed to live in District 2 on their property, in their mobile home, and their RV. So I just don't think that that's a wise thing that we should be doing. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if that's enforceable, but that was just my input. I didn't have a lot of problems with making it more beneficial for the people, but I just don't think it should be limited to D5. If this is a good thing for District 5, it should be a good thing for the whole county, but have the criteria where it wouldn't interfere with, whatever you're trying to avoid in those other districts. Put that criteria into the code. Don't write code specific for political purposes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
I didn't want to turn this in because I wanted it to be about safety today. And now we're transferring stuff.
All right, Larry, come on. We
My
know.
turn?
You're up.
Oh,
Yes, sir, because we got that set up, Larry.
I'm
We'll
the
get that
third,
right again.
fourth person to touch it. Oh, no. All right.
Name and address for the record, please.
Larry Downs Jr., 12156 Havburg Drive, Pensacola. And we live in a rural area, even though the zoning was changed 5 years ago. Ridiculous. So anyhow, our county, our state, and our country, we're in trouble. We're in financial trouble. I mean, it's going to be so enormous, even in the very near future. And we're going to have more people that are going to be homeless. We're going to have more people that are going to have problems getting a job. Many businesses have gone out. This is not secret. Everybody knows this. I don't think they realize the impact it's going to have. Upwards of $10 trillion already gone federally, and with the remdesivir and everything else, that's going to be taking $3,000, $5,000 for a lot of our Medicaid, Medicare, instead of the alternative of a couple $100. I mean, this is massive. So, for people to be able to have quiet and reasonable use of their property, that's what this board and mainly our county commission, because they're the ones who got to approve your recommendations, has impeded and restricted people's property rights, all because I don't like how it looks. We're going to have to figure out which type of camper I would be willing to tolerate. It's just ridiculous. Y'all know it. Everybody knows it. We've become a tattletale nation. Tattletale. Call on your neighbor. Oh, y'all don't have masks on. We need to report you to Grover Robinson. Oh my God. We're in trouble here. 14 days. Who's gonna say whether I was living in my camper for 14 days or not? How much resources are we gonna waste on this stuff? It's beside my home. How do you know I'm just not going in there enjoying my time on Facebook all night to get away from my wife, visiting with my children? Come on. This is an overreach. It's too much. So this direction, what Barry's asking for, I would love to see this pushed on through, of course, for all our districts. And more, way more than this. This is like asking for, and it's sad. Here we are asking this. So we can have quiet and reasonable use of our property. Isn't that sad? Sad. Good day.
Okay, is there anyone else that hasn't spoke yet that wishes to speak?
Can I ask one question?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, I appreciate it. The one question I wanted to ask about the 14-day thing, sir, was if they live in it 14 days and then don't for a day, and then come back for another 14 days, how do they do the restriction with regards to that? Because that, I think, could wind up being an issue. I live in for 14 days, then I go stay in my friend's house for a day, then I go back another 14 days to bypass that. Are they going to have that kind of thing?
The code says 14 days in a calendar year.
Right.
I know.
14
Oh, a
days in a
calendar year?
calendar year, yes, sir. It doesn't have contiguous or anything, it's 14 days total in a
Well,
calendar
this whole
year.
country's breaking that law. Wow. Okay, thank you.
I mean, Larry brought up a good point. I mean, the enforcement of this, as it stands right now, I'm sure is very difficult. I mean, very difficult
I can tell you,
to.
Mr. Brisky, it's not, it's not, there's 14 people, the neighbors do what? They call, I mean, I don't wanna say tattletales, people have the right to be concerned
But how
about
would they know if you're living in it or if you're just going in there to
It is-
work on it or?
It's their burden of proof. It is their burden of proof. There are mechanisms that code enforcement do have in place to meet that requirement. They do work with us, believe me, it is definitely every week there are calls about RVs.
Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yes, sir. Mr. Powell.
It's just about the burden of proof.
Hold on, Mr. Powell has the floor.
I just want to ask, is there, I'm all about, I don't want to kick it down we've talked about it before, I'm all about making the decision, pulling the trigger, but quite frankly, I think we have enough on this. Can we not push it back to the commissioners and specifically ask to have sincere discussion about the District 5 language and the day, the timeframe? And basically, I mean, I would make a move to reject it as is with concern on those two topics to be addressed, unless there is some urgency that we have. Again, we haven't, it's been away for this long. I mean, do we have to pass it today? Is there something that the commissioners have to get? With respect to Commissioner Berry, we're pushing this, but I would think that this merits a little more conversation on the District 5 language and the arbitrary 14-day time frame.
Mr. Powell?
I second Mr. Pyle's concerns.
I mean, we are definitely, these issues definitely will be discussed at the BCC. But, so they will be. This 14-day issue is not the first time that has been discussed. There was some changes a few years ago to lengthen that requirement. So the 14-day requirement is not a new issue. It's been here since I've been here. There was interpretations on the old planning board. Mr. Brisket knows there was a way we had the interpretation with planning board. It's still way back then. So now if there's a need for us to come back and look at that again, we can ask the Board of County Commissioners for that direction. Or if you all just want to have it, and we can say the planning board do have a concern, once this get through, to talk about. What is a good time span?
Let me offer another suggestion. The planning board can make an alteration to this document to include all of the districts and to include a longer time frame and approve that and send that forward. And then the commissioners would have to make a decision on whether they accepted it or rejected it. And that's an option.
My point, I guess, was that let's make a good recommendation as opposed to an expedient one. And I'm not saying that this isn't good, and I know that, Griff, you've worked on this hard, and I know your mind's right now starting to try to figure out the verbiage that would maybe mollify all these concerns, but we can. I thought about that before. I was gonna say, make an amendment to it with these two things, but I couldn't kind of I don't think I can just do it in a concise manner. That's why I thought it may need, again, we're guessing on the intent of Commissioner Berry because we weren't in the room and or the other commissioners. I would just think, again, this has been the way it is for a long time. That doesn't mean it's right or wrong. I'm glad that we're doing something, and I think we should do something. And I think it was great. I thought I had a handle on this last night. And I mean, the 14-day was the differentiator for me. But then again, the concern was the District 5 language. So I'm good either way, quite frankly. But I just thought, unless there's something that underlying that I don't know, maybe the county administrator or yourself can tell me that the commissioners are in a real big hurry for this for some particular reason. And that impacts Beulah, that doesn't impact me, and I'm being selfish because I'm in Perdido. We'll do something, but I just would rather get it right.
Of course, there are always some parties that are in need of certain things, of course. But again, this ordinance, it came about through much discussion, much effort, much work, and again, and your changes, the county administrator is aware of the concerns, and so, and we will bring them up again, even after this meeting. So, but the Board of County Commissioners, they can have that discussion at their level. And if they provide, say yes, kick it back, they will.
Larry, I'm going to allow you to ask one question very briefly. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, who did you say the burden of proof was on?
According to the land code, Larry, when it comes to land use issues, to prove that there's this acre, if it's valid, it's always, the burden of proof is on the applicant.
I thought it was on the government to present a case.
Of course, we're always going to present a case, but it's always on them as well, Larry. And I think you know that.
Yeah, I just don't agree with it.
Yeah.
Can I make a motion? I'm ready to make a motion.
You got me. Which way I'm gonna go. Okay. Here's the discussion. I'm either gonna bring up an amendment to approve it with two changes, being that District 5 language be struck and it's for all districts, and the 14-day be changed to 30-day.
I would support that.
And/or we reject it and have a discussion and bring it back. Does that answer the question? When I brought up the district information, and inference was in more densely populated areas, it wouldn't be as acceptable. However, I think most of the densely populated areas are most likely covered under HOA and/or other restrictive guidelines within a subdivision of some sort. So I would think that it would still. So,
Mr. Pyle, can I make a suggestion?
yes.
Because I think we're pretty strong on this conversation. My suggestion was, I was going to make a recommendation to deny it. If it doesn't pass, then you make a recommendation to change it. But I think that procedure will set precedence and set the tone to the BCC that we need to set.
But the question is, the reasons we would deny it, are they addressed in those two items or not? I mean, if they're not, then you're right, we deny it.
In my recommendation, I want to state the two.
And I want to add something.
If you're okay with that, I can go ahead and make the recommendation.
And I do want to add, and I will be bringing it forward before the board anyway, so, but the planning board do have some, the reason why the planning board's, the concerns, I can state that, but it will be going before the board.
But it'll also be on the record,
Yes.
the reasons.
Well, as a matter of procedure, if we deny something, recommend denial, then they can just override and approve it. Vice versa. If we make a alternate proposal and recommend approval, then they would have to send it back to the planning board to change the language in it, or can they change that language at the Board of County Commission hearing? And direct staff to go back and say, no, it's only for 14 days and it's only for District 5. Because that would be completely changing the recommended order of the planning board.
It still would be a recommendation, and they can change it. It would be, y'all is making a recommendation, and you can say, these are the recommended language, and they could either say we like it, include and make it, we could do it on a writer sheet and add it in there before it go on, or we can,
Okay.
yeah. And that has
Okay.
happened before, Mr. Briscoe.
In my opinion, if we have a consensus on what the language should be, that's what we should send to them. And then they can do with it what they choose.
Exactly. That's what
So I move that we change the 14 days to 30 days, and I move that we change the District 5 to countywide,
Thanks,
with
sir.
the exception of the other exceptions that were in there.
Everything else would remain the same, just
Yes.
those provisions would change.
Yes.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Awesome.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, before we go on to the next item, can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes.
We're gonna
yes.
have a consultant appear by video, and we wanna make sure we have the audio worked out.
Okay, let's come back at 9:45. They got our clock corrected.
Thank you for that. I don't know if it's true, but thank you for that.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you, let's see.
Now, hear me?
I can't hear you, can you hear me?
I can hear the background information.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Turn off this. Can you speak now?
Yes, we can hear you, can you hear me? Testing, testing.
I can't hear you.
Testing, testing, testing.
I don't know why I can't hear you. Is it possible to maybe I send out, I mean, what I'm being told by IT is that they think that it's because there's a live stream, that it's not being able to do it through that.
She can't hear us. And you're not able to hear us at all from the Teams.
No.
Yeah, you can try.
think that Kia can turn on her microphone and Juan turn off yours?
Here on the phone now, you just leave her phone by a speaker, by.
Yeah, you can hear that. Did you hear that, Isabel?
Because we
No.
can hear her perfect.
So we're gonna try to just keep you on speakerphone so you can talk through the cell phone.
Okay.
Yeah, this is gonna be the best way.
So we need to mute Juan's microphone now, right?
Yeah.
You can do it, Juan.
Okay, so right now it's just. I shouldn't hear myself. Oh, yeah, there's the echo.
Yeah, you're gonna have to, no, I mean, you're gonna have to like go over there. And, so she can hear the speakers, but do these microphones have a speaker on them, that you can hear them?
No.
Well, you just put it over, you just put the phone over there, or leave it just right here. No, you can't.
I don't leave it here.
No, all we're gonna do is let her hear this, that's all she wants to do is hear them.
Yes. So how do we do that?
Yeah, so usually the phone sits down here. Yeah. On the
Okay.
side.
They're loud enough, she should be able to hear all the questions.
Yeah, she'll be able to hear that. But this is louder.
Yeah, we can hear her.
Can you talk for me again? Can you talk for me again?
You want me to talk through here?
Yeah, thank you. All right. All right, so that's gonna work. You guys, when you talk to her, can you talk loud?
So I can talk through Teams.
Yeah, can you hear us?
Yeah, there's an echo, but. Kia, why don't you try unmuting yourself on Teams? Okay. I can hear you.
That's not us.
Yeah, I think there's a pretty bad echo. I don't know. Is it okay with you? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
How bad is it on your end?
There's a good amount of feedback.
How about could be on the phone?
Can you hear us? Okay, we'll have to do it like this then.
So she just needs to give her whole presentation, and then just, so there isn't a bunch of feedback. Later, they can ask questions, but this, all these microphones being on and everything, it just feeds.
Absolutely, whatever you want.
Because that's the only way that it's gonna get recorded. And that they can see. Okay? Have to let her know.
Okay, Isabel, so we're going to,
And/or you can type the questions in what they're asking inside, because you're on it. You can ask her the questions, or just talk to her.
okay, so Isabel, I'm I'm gonna introduce the ordinances, and then we're going to give it to you to give your presentation. And then once the board has questions, we may have to type them out to you, and, or we may be able to do it with just a little bit of feedback.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me speak.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, we ready to go back in session?
Yes, we are.
All right, I hereby call back to order the meeting for August 4th, 2020. And we do have all our members back for a quorum. We're now going to go into public hearing 6B, a public hearing concerning the review of ordinance amending Chapter 3, Section 3.04 definitions, OBJ Flu 1.3, Flu map designations, and Flu 3.1 rural development. That the board will review and recommend to the Board of County Commissioners for adoption an ordinance amending the comprehensive plan, amending Chapter 3, Section 3.04 definitions, amending OBJ Flu 1.3 future land use map designations, and amending OBJ Flu 3.1 rural development.
Okay, these next two ordinances actually go hand in hand. David, could I get you to switch the screen back to the ordinance screen? So the first ordinance is going to be an amendment to the comprehensive plan for the purpose of establishing a new future land use category, a new transitional future land use category. So what this first ordinance does is, you'll see that we've included a new definition, if I can get down to it, for existing rural communities. We did not have a definition of what that actually meant in the comp plan, so we're gonna add that in. It's established rural, residential, or mixed-use areas within the agriculture residential, which is the new category, and rural community future land use categories that are developed land that contain homes and/or businesses, including agricultural and agriculture-related operation and/or other civic and community uses that are located along highways, federal roads, and major county roads as identified on the future land use map. So we have that new definition, and what this first ordinance also does is it establishes the new agriculture residential transitional future land use category. So the general description is just there. The key point here is that it includes the agricultural and silvicultural related activities and low to medium density residential uses. And that's all that this first ordinance does. Well, no, it's not. This Flu-3.1.5, new rural communities. So we're revising this portion to say that to protect silviculture, agriculture, and agriculture-related activities, Escambia County will guide the establishment of new rural communities towards existing rural communities. And that existing rural communities is what we have newly defined. So the second ordinance that goes with this is the amendment to the Land Development Code for the purpose of implementing the new future land use category. So what this second ordinance does is we're establishing the new agriculture residential future land use category first. And then you'll see on our revised future land use chart that we are adding this transitional category of AR between the AG and RC future land use categories. You'll see that before this density was one dwelling unit per 20 acres, and the very next step down was 2 dwelling units per acre. So this transition will allow for 1 dwelling unit per 4 acres. And the remainder of this ordinance is just for the purpose of implementing the new future land use category into the AGR and RR zoning districts. So this section implements it into the AGR category, and the only change in this portion of the ordinance is at the very end. Right here, so if you're rezoning to AGR, agriculture residential is a new possibility for future land use. And the same for rural residential district, if you're rezoning to RR, AR future land use is a new possibility for you. And that's it for these ordinances. David, if you could switch it back to Isabel's screen. So next, we're going to have a presentation from Ms. Isabel Albert. She's a senior urban planner and an AICP from Half Associates. And the county attorney's office engaged Half Associates after, excuse me, after previously we had a challenge to a prior ordinance that totally removed the prohibition against the establishment of new rural communities. So that was the FLU 3.1.5. We had a prior ordinance where we totally struck that. So these revised ordinances are for the purpose of bringing forth a more comprehensive way to address growth and development in Escambia County without totally removing the prohibition. And I would like to turn it over to Isabel for her presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, this morning for allowing me to present this presentation. As Kia said, my name is Isabel Albert. I'm an urban planner from Tampa. I've been practicing for over 20 years in this area in Florida in planning. And as she said, we've been engaged to help figure out the rural area and the future growth of how to manage it. I just want to make sure that you understand and you can hear me clearly.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. So if you look at my presentation, what we're looking at is future land use. So when we are engaged, we look at the background information, and then more specifically the case that you all heard and that was challenged. And so when we started to take a look at this, it was a very interesting configuration, but also land use designation in your county. So what you have is you have a big majority of your county that has a future land use classification of 1 unit per 20 acre. And the next one after that is 2 units per acre. There seems to be a big lack of transition. And looking at that, you have to understand that a big majority of, I would say about half your county is not promoting any future growth or not managing any future growth. And so we took a look at all that, and there was a clearly distinction of transition need. But when you look at the zoning, and that is interesting, the zoning has a classification of the 1 to 20, but also has a zoning classification of 1 to 4 units. And then the next one after that would be the 2 to 1. So there is a transition going on in the zoning, but not in the future land use. And zoning has to be compliant with the future land use. And then when you go through your comprehensive plan, you looking at your plan clearly envisions growth. There's the first, your first goal is to future development pattern and to support and facilitate the desired future growth, but at the same time protecting the natural resources and historic resources. And you also have the growth strategies to do just basically to orderly and balance your growth. And how do we do that? And you also look at the rural strategies, and the rural strategy also talks about future growth. So it's not prohibiting any growth, it's just talking about managing future growth. And to also, where is this growth going to go? It's going to go towards existing rural communities. And that was a sentence that was very much debated on what did that mean. And interestingly enough, your code or the comprehensive plan did not have any definition of what that meant. So it's hard to implement it if you don't know what that means. And then you also have to look at your housing provision, and that brings it back to, interestingly, Mr. Larry, who spoke in your earlier case, you have to provide housing needs for all types, for all type, density, size, ownership, cost, location, and that was not being, I believe that policy 3.1.5 was prohibiting that. And so looking at all of that, we had to see, what are we dealing with? What's going to happen in your growth? Right now, your comprehensive plan is up to 2030. We projected up to 2035 just to see there is a steadily growth. That is going to happen no matter what is going to, no matter what that's happening naturally. But then that results into what kind of housing, or what is your housing need? And this is a projected housing need that's going to be needed by 2035. And so it is still an 18% increase of need, and it has to be addressed. But also you have to address in the rural area, the median household income is $54,000. So you have $55,000. You have to take that into consideration of living there and wanted to purchase available housing size or lot size to live. And you look at that again, the southern part of it, south over here, that's really, it's developed. It's really more urbanized area. And what we're looking at is this area north of here. This is the rural area. There's been discussion, like I say, I spoke with staff, and from staff experience, they get a lot of question, and it seems like there was a need to have smaller lot size than 1 to 20 acres. They wanted the option to have a smaller lot size, and those are very difficult to obtain at this point. And also, we had some discussions with different agencies, including talking with Danita Andrews. She's the Chief Business Development Officer for the Florida West, who is the economic development group in charge of Escambia County. And we were talking about what are the biggest industries that you have. And there are some 2 big timber industries located in Molino, and then one northern to the northeast corner of the county. But she was also, commenting that the farming industry is changing, and it's not the large lots anymore. So there's some of that we had to take a look into, and making sure that we weren't, proposing some development in protected agricultural land. So with that, this is how we propose the land use category that's already, it's mimicking what's currently approved in your land development code. So it was just 1 per 4 acre, 1 unit per 4 acre. But also we needed to provide a clarification or a definition of what existing rural communities are. And in the definition, I don't know if you picked up, but that they would have to be located along highways, federal roadways, major county roads, and these are already identified on your future land use maps. It does help guide with the location of where that future growth is going to go. And then part of that, as she's saying, the second ordinance is you'd have to amend the land development code to reflect this new land use category. So here, the next slide, we looked at the vacant parcels that are currently in ag land use. So the area in light green is the 1 to 20 future land use category right now. And the yellow areas are the vacant piece of land that we identified. And the total vacant is 671 parcels. But I wanted to also look at which parcel that are greater than 4, less than 20, that would be able to fit into this new category that we're proposing. And there's about 206. But interestingly enough, as you see, they are located along the major roadways that are identified in the comprehensive plan. So that is basically managing your growth on where it's going to go to future growth. So that's what we have for now. I'm available for any questions. I know that we are looking for comments so that refine this. And I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask Horace and maybe staff members to give a little bit of background information on, I seem to remember that we got a directive at one point from the old DCA. This was before the Department of Economic Opportunity that, for lack of a better word, kind of instructed the county to reserve these properties in the agricultural area, and what I thought at the time kind of an arbitrary line was drawn along Bear No Park road area. Horace or Griff or somebody who's familiar with it, can you just give the board a background as to how that first came about and why those strict regulations went in place?
If my memory serves me correctly, and maybe Drew or Griff can help if I'm missing something, your question specifically, I do recall there was way back with old DCA, and I think Mr. Briggs, you were about the only member that was on the board at the time. There was some recommendations that were offered, planning tools, that perhaps that there could be what we call an urban service boundary established. Again, that was a recommendation, only a tool in the tool shed to see if we could basically help protect those agricultural areas. And I think the county did look at that, but it never did make any on that urban service boundary. That was a new tool that many communities were doing across the board. I do know there was some discussions on that under the old DCA, but that was only a recommendation.
Horace, I understood it to be more than just a recommendation from the DCUA. Back a review of our comprehensive plan at one point. How did the boundary line of Bear No Park Road get established? Because that's kind of been the standard that I've understood.
Now, God, you going way back in the CCAS days where I was not one of the originators on the CCAS study. You know, they had so many categories. We had so many future land use categories, 33 zoning, and I think 33 these categories. And then and the Board of County Commissioners, we have mixed use 1, mixed use 6, and that was the problem. The challenge was the mixed use area. And with the old DCA, they did actually look in those things, and they did do a whole bunch of data and analysis and looked at many options concerning that. I think that was one of the lines that was established, that was looked at as being a choice to use. But I don't know what happened. I know all of those things did get adopted, but I don't know what happened to where that demarcation was removed.
Okay, so that formal urban boundary service line, I think is what you're calling it, was never formally established, or it was removed?
It was never formally established. It was only, they presented several choices, several alternatives.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
And if I remember correctly, their concern at the time was urban sprawl and lack of infrastructure support in the more rural areas for their recommendations. Is that correct?
I believe that was part of the concern that yonder. We all the way go back to like 2004, 2000, and from starting 2000, even starting in 2003, under the old MU6 category. Yes, sir.
Okay. I just wanted to give the board a little bit of background that this has been something that Tallahassee has made a lot of recommendations in the years. Drew, did you have more you wanted to add?
So back when we were working with the consultants on the last year that resulted in the creation of our current comprehensive plan. That line was chosen as a prospective urban service boundary because of, I think it was, that's as far north as ECUA would provide water. North of that, you had the service providers, and it's a good straight line. It's section lines that run all the way across. And, I think that's what it was, because we had discussed that. This was years and years ago, but it never went further. DCA, though, did suggest also in our flu categories, we had minimum densities, and not just maximum, but minimum. It was designed to essentially work the same way and direct density to the flu categories, basically, that were more infrastructure. Just found as I that.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, questions for our consultant before we go into public comment portion?
One for Isabel. The use of frontal language for roads, I understand, if I understand you correctly, is a means and method of controlling perceived sprawl, I'm assuming. I'm just questioning why and/or, so if I owned, this would preclude, I had 20 acres and I had 4 family members that wanted to come out in the middle that is not on a frontage road. We wish to build 5 homes, would most likely under AGR not be able to permit for that. But if it happened to be on 97 or 99 or one of the frontal roads, then it would be. I'm just curious about the behind that, and it's just me standing, just asking for her input on that.
Kia, can you restate that question, please?
It was a long question.
Yes, it was.
The highways, what's it for? Is it for to control urban sprawl, and how does that work?
The use of the highway is basically, if you look at your comprehensive plan, this is the zoning, sorry, comprehensive plan. On the land use map plan, there's identifies, and it's not shown here, but it identifies the major roadways, the major local roadways in the rural area. So you can see where that's basically where you were going to start seeing growth, is in that area. So it was also to identify some kind of location criteria that would help guide where you would start seeing the growth, but also along those roadways is where you would see if ever there's a developer decides to expand the infrastructure, that's where it's basically going to start going. And that's a natural growth pattern would be along the major roadways.
Fair enough, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? All right, stand by. We do have some speakers from the public who wish to speak on this matter. Our first speaker is Ms. Jacqueline Rogers. Good morning, Ms. Rogers. For this case, please state your name and address for the record.
Jacqueline Rogers, 1420 Ridgeway, Cantonment. Hey, what I was trying to figure out what's the goal of this amendment? What problem are we trying to solve? Is creating a new flu category the best way to accomplish this? The language in the existing communities, existing rural communities, is very vague, I think, and it makes all those flus, it makes them existing rural communities. So now agricultural, it says right here, including agricultural and agriculture-related operations, well, that can be now an existing rural community. And then now you've changed later in the ordinance that you're going to guide new development towards existing rural communities. So therefore, you're saying you're going to guide, or it's possible to guide new development to your agricultural areas. What that is inconsistent with the rest of your the rest of the comprehensive plan, where it says you're going to protect silviculture and agricultural, and that's also required in the state statutes, and I have citations for that, but I can't do that in 3 minutes. So I'm asking you, how is this going to protect agriculture and silviculture? You already have the capability of more density if that's what you're looking for. If you want these 4 to 5 acre lots, you can do that in the ag flu. You would just have to cluster, and there's provisions where you can cluster 4 or 5 lots. You would have to keep some of the other open for agricultural. You can also do it in the rural community, and I think that's what the problem is here. I think we need to change the rural community flu to allow some expansion of that, instead of just saying, I mean, it's kind of strange to have a flu category that says just what existed when we made this comp plan. That's what rural community is. And I think this agricultural residential is an attempt to fix rural community, but you're not fixing rural community. So you could make rural community to expand where it's already existing and have properties around that. This is a reactive to a constituent subdivision request. You know that. It's come back and forth to you in different ways. And I think this is a duplicative flu category, and I don't think that the state will like that. I think there's a need. Staff has all these anecdotal things, but you have to show data and analysis. How many people have asked for this? Lots of people want affordable waterfront property too, but you don't take the waterfront property and make it affordable and say, okay, we're going to cut up lots and we're going to do all this stuff so everyone can afford to live there. You know, some people just can't afford to live in some places. You're in danger of incentivizing sprawl by going along the highways because you're purposely stringing it out instead of staying with the rural community areas that you already have and adding on to those. You're going to go up 29, you're going to go up 97, and that, I believe, is against the state statutes that say you're removing, you're putting higher density away from the existing infrastructure. I guess I'm out of time, but I have lots of other ideas to the specific language, but thank you.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman. This is listed as 2 items on our agenda. So are we now combining it and saying we can only have 3 minutes? I think we should have 6. That's what we prepared for.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Rogers, it is 2 cases. I'll permit you to have 6 minutes instead of just the 3 because it is 2 cases.
Okay, and I'll try and go quickly on this. There is no mention in here of the sector plan, and I don't know if the consultant even did that, even considered that. He's saying that there's a need for housing with the population, but that's why the sector plan was created. You remember that, Mr. Brisky, we took agricultural lands in that 15,000 acre and said, this is population projection, where's our housing going to go? And that's what the sector plan is. So if you're not taking into consideration what you already have available, much of the sector plan is still not developed, and you're saying we're projecting this housing, where is that in this in taken into account? So you need real data and analysis, not anecdotal. You know, somebody called my office and said they wanted this. Affordability argument, I think I talked about that. So the protection of agriculture and silviculture land is still mandated by the state. You can't chop up agricultural pieces and then try and reassemble them later. Obviously, once agricultural land is gone, it's gone. And there's a big proof that people want quality of life. They want farm to table. If we don't have any farmland, so maybe agriculture is changing and we're not doing it exactly the same way, but there's still a need for locally produced things. And she said that timberland was one of the biggest producers up here, and that was, I think it was 35% of our economic, when I looked into it, our economic production. So that timberland is agricultural, it's silviculture, and that needs to be protected. The definition of existing rural community is bad because you've just made the agricultural land existing, and I did talk about that. On page 5, in that flu, the agricultural residential, you talk about low and medium density, but you don't define what that is. And on page 6, the goal flu 3 rural strategies, you say that new development will be guided toward existing rural communities, but again, I said that you made agricultural that. So that's all I have. I just think, I think this is, you know, a commissioner-driven initiative. I think that we did identify some things that we need to change. Rural community probably needs to be redone so we can expand within existing areas. That way we're not spreading up the highways, but we're saying where the crossroads were, that's where the existing rural community flu was placed, and so we can expand on that. Thank you.
Ms. Rogers, I have a question for you.
Sure.
And I want to make sure I understand. When you discussing rural communities, are you using the definition that we have on record, or are you talking about them in general as the Walnut Hill area, or how are you addressing
The
that?
flu category, I'm sorry.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're talking about the flu category directly, okay.
Which sometimes they overlap.
Right, I
Yeah,
understand,
yeah.
yep. I don't want this to become a discussion about the sector plan, but I think one of the challenges that we see with the sector plan is that a lot of the properties in there are already developed. They already have structures on them. They already have houses and things like that. They were included in the sector plan, but they're not necessarily vacant property that's available. And I know from looking at each of those land use areas, it's very difficult to get a feasible development project in those areas. So there's obviously some things that probably are going to need to be adjusted on that sector plan to make it more user-friendly. It would obviously be in the county's best interest to use that property first because it's the next area that would grow. So I tend to agree with you on that. I think the sector plan, and again, I don't want to turn this into a full-blown discussion about that, but I would agree that there's some properties in that area that could potentially be looked at.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I live in the sector plan, and the whole 15,000 acres, you're right, a lot of us were roped into that without really understanding it. But there were large agricultural swaths that were converted, 80 acres here. On the end of Neal Road and Highway 29, there's a little property, but then there's a larger property. Those are places where housing could go at different densities. You know, there's some of it is 3 dwelling units per acre, and then as it goes into the town centers, it's closer. It's more dense.
But would you also agree that there's also properties that were put into conservation easements where the development rights were lessened in those areas?
There were properties that were agricultural before, so even though they had some 50% open space requirements, they still, as your staff testified, had their development rights increased. That's what I would agree to, because that's what your staff testified to.
Okay.
So to the max, what they could do if they were someplace else, they might have less, but they had more. Once the sector plan came, they were given development rights.
Okay. Yes, another question.
Real quick,
Ms.
I'm sorry.
Rogers.
Sure.
Sorry, I just want to make sure I'm understanding as well that, if I understand you correct, are you concerned about the agricultural designated areas being consumed by this new transitional designation? Number one, and I guess two, I mean, as far as the economic argument, I would think it makes sense that if you have 1 per 20 acres versus 1 per 4, it's clearly economically challenging if, you know, that's a huge difference.
Sure.
And the third thing I just think I'm focusing on with you is also that if you maintain this highway, or going up the highway or the streets, you believe, in opposition to the consultant, that would add to sprawl as opposed to control it. Is that correct?
Correct, because you have to provide services, you have to provide bus services, you have to provide ambulance service as you develop, you know, further out on the county. I live middle, Neal Road, Highway 29, maybe in that, a little bit above the waist, how the Escambia goes in there. It takes me 30 minutes to get to Century, and it takes me 30 minutes to get downtown. So as we concentrate development further and further north, that is an expenditure of more roads that you have to maintain, more services that you have to provide. So in infill, we've developed everything, and we've encouraged infill, and into the sector plan, I'd be against incentivizing this, because where are the developers going to go? They're, as we discussed before, they're going to get a cheap, big swath of land that wasn't paid a lot of taxes on it. They're going to get it for a good price, and they're going to put subdivisions in up there. I'm not against growth. You know, I'm not against the one guy or, you know, a couple people, small subdivisions, things like that. And someone mentioned family, if your family wanted to live on family conveyances that you can do on your property. I'm not against growth, but I really do think we have to think it out because there's a cost after the developer leaves.
But I think the point is that the attempt is that's the logical place they will grow is off these highways because of utilities, whereas sprawl would be defined as these spot acreages and different. So it's kind of like we're talking.
No, I understand what you're saying, and it kind of says what Mr. Brisky said. Sometimes they overlap because the existing rural community flu that we have now has developed along the highways, especially crossroads. So someplace, it makes sense along the highways. But if you go up Highway 29, you can see that it does get more rural when you go up Highway 29. So I'm not saying against the highway horrible. I'm just saying, not necessarily saying everything up the highway all the way to the top is great. That's what I'm saying.
Any other questions for Ms. Rogers? Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Teresa Blackwell? Good morning, Ms. Blackwell. Please state your name and address for the record.
Good morning, Chairman Brisky. Teresa Blackwell, 9535 Tower Ridge Road in Beulah. I agree wholeheartedly with Ms. Rogers. Once again, excellent, excellent comments. So I hope you will pay attention. I'm the more emotional one, but I would say here, this is a solution in search of a problem. The problem is never clearly delineated. Deducing from the solutions here, this is designed specifically to allow one of Commissioner Berry's constituents to build a sprawl subdivision on ag land far out in the countryside. To do that, the commissioner needed to change the definition of existing rural communities. And this definition basically opens up the ag land in the North County. It's open season for sprawl subdivisions. So once again, it is designed to help developers and not for the benefit of residents who need the silviculture and agricultural land preserved in our, our comp plans. We will do that. So, then also the specific developer wanted to build houses on 4-acre lots. So the density proposed for AR just happens to be one house per 4 acres. An arbitrary number, never justified in the materials distributed. It quintuples density allowed on that land. And density, we're gonna, in one part of it they say low to medium density, really? I don't think, that would not be appropriate. And they also needed to change the description of rural development. The definition as written does not even make sense. If you read that sentence, let's see. Okay, let's see. It doesn't even read correctly. I can't put my hand on it at the moment, but you read it and you just kind of go, what? That doesn't make sense. So that needs to be revised. There's, the second, item C, this adds the new flu category, agricultural residential, to the LDC, basically in the chart, and also the descriptions on rezoning at the end of the LDC, descriptions of AGR and RR zoning. So again, what is the problem? Is that a problem that we should address? If so, is this the best way to address it? It's a bad idea. It will open up all the ag flu to development. Development along highways, that's strip development. That is not desirable type of development. It's not good from a planning standpoint. Mr. Gray, if he were still here, I think would reinforce that. And I agree that we should have a method for expanding RC, but if you look at this map, there's plenty more RC up there above the sector plan. Use what's in the sector plan, we need to be infilling as we can, and then there's RC there. There's a large area of RC where it makes sense to have the greater density, so use those places. And then the report, once again, you know, it has some data, some random data you can pull somewhere, but where's the analysis? It doesn't analyze it in a meaningful way for us. You know, it fails to justify why we need this change. So I think this needs to go back to the drawing board, and I don't understand why we needed to use the taxpayers' money to hire a consultant to do this when we have county staff on board being paid to do this kind of work, and I think they would have been far more capable at presenting this case and writing this ordinance than what we have here. Thank you.
Ms. Blackwell, I have a question for you.
Okay.
And I don't want to go into the specifics of the subdivision or the case that you're referencing, but just a general question.
Mm-hmm.
In the area where there are rural communities, I think some of the challenges are whether it's within those boundaries or whether it's adjacent or adjoining or contiguous. And if we have a parcel that's nearby to the community, nearby to some of the infrastructure and the support services, how would you propose that, because obviously those areas are going to be the first ones to grow. People would probably gravitate towards those areas if they could.
Right.
But what's your proposal on how to handle things like that are just slightly outside of the rural community boundary, but still, that's why I asked Ms. Rogers, are you talking about an area in general, or are you talking about just specifically the boundaries of the rural community?
Right. Well, I have been talking about the flu, rural communities, and I agree that we do need to provide a mechanism for growing the rural community flu when that is needed. Where is that need? You know, a developer wants to build houses on land he bought cheaply, covered with pine trees, to make money doing that, and it will create sprawl that will be expensive for us. No, that's not a need there. It needs to be much more.
What would be a justifiable need in your mind to expand that area?
Well, in my mind, the thing that came to mind is our current spot zoning. Land that is adjoining current rural communities would be able to grow if, you know, it would provide, that would be the logical place, I would think, on the edges of the existing RC you know, you all could use your judgment. Is that the right thing for the community? Not just the right thing for the developer. So I am not anti-growth. I know we're going to have more population, and we need to provide for that. So we could look at that just like we do all the other zoning. You know, is it illogical in that spot? You know, should we let it grow there or not? Are we protecting the amount of agricultural land that we should be protecting? So, you know, I would leave that to your judgment at that time, just like you do with any other zoning. Is that answering your question, or?
Yeah, I guess I also live in the sector plan area, so I'm very familiar with this part of the property, and I know that the rural community boundary property along the southern part of Highway 99 there, which is not typically what you would consider a rural community boundary, not like Molino or something, or even Walnut Hill for that matter, but that is an area where there are rural properties and it's considered a rural community. So there's quite a difference between that area of the county and a Molino or even a Walnut Hill. I just was trying to get your thoughts on that, because this type of growth would be similar to that area of the county. So are you saying where it's more of an urban area or just strictly going by the rural community boundaries?
Well, we put a lot of thought into designating those rural community areas, I would think, that they were logical places. But, you know, when you talk about urban, you know, suburban sprawl, you know, it's just not logical to, it's very undesirable to put development out in the countryside. And those people moved there because they want that kind of a place, that character. So they should be able to keep that character as long as they can. I mean, when we have to use it, we do, but not in the meantime. We protect it. And, you know, hopefully in the end, more housing would be developed in the urban areas. More people are liking that, having a downtown where they can walk, et cetera. So I don't see where this need is now to, you know, there's just one subdivision developer. That's what the need is.
Okay.
So,
Any other questions for Ms. Blackwell?
I have a question that might help. Could we see a depiction of side-by-side of the current flu map with the the impact of the change?
That was for a side-by-side of the current flu map.
And what the change would look like?
I don't know how to do the side by side, but I mean, this is the current future land use. And then when we did a review of vacant land, so what you can see here, that's clear, that's the RC. So there's the RC. And then this is conservation area, this is RC. So sort of this was the areas that we're looking at, you know, the potential.
Can we see
that
specifically
can be
the
changed
new
for
AR?
the land use category.
Do you have a map that shows specifically the new AR flu? Well, there wouldn't be anything because.
No, there's none of that, correct. I mean, the AR flu is really just giving the opportunity for somebody to apply for a 4-acre piece of property, and it's still going to be agricultural. Like, you know, Mrs. Rogers mentioned, you know, the farm to table. You would see that on a 4-acre piece of property. And so it's just to provide an opportunity. There's still other requirements that it would have to meet.
Yeah, they would still go through the typical future land use change.
And development. I mean, it depends if they're going to be on, you know, my experience in the rural areas, people are on water and sewer to have a minimum size. They have to be, you know, you still have to meet all those regulations. By doing this change, this bus service, it's not going to happen, I can tell you, anytime soon. And it's not how you would see the rural area either.
Okay.
This is just to provide an opportunity that makes sense of a transition between the 1 to 20 acres, which is a lot. That's a big piece of property to allow a individual who wants smaller than that and just to apply for it. And it's just want to clarify too that the 1 to 4 was really taken from the Land Development Code. You have a current zoning designation with that.
I just want to say for Beulah, you know, saying that it's not going to happen soon, well, it'll happen faster than you think. It can, and it has for us.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blackwell.
Thank you.
Mr. Larry Downs Jr.? Got 6 minutes this time, Larry. What are you gonna do with all that time?
All right, I just want y'all, I won't use it all. But I do want y'all to know that everybody else has been touching this, touching the mic, touching all this. So I'm not the only one, horse. All right. Every one of them, as a matter of fact. I have it on video. All right, you know, this is people wanting to utilize their property. Their property to sell, to build on, to do whatever. I'm for it. You know, I don't think it goes far enough. But, everything changes. At one time, where we're having the meeting at right here was agriculture property at one time. That's just, life goes on. We got the sector plan, the master plan, the flu, and 100 other acronyms, or 1,000, It's just, like Jacqueline says, I don't think, she says that they, the cluster. I mean, why do they have to cluster? Why can't they be spread out? I mean, it's been like that for, many years. If somebody wants to build on it and they go through the development that's required and they have sewer or they have a proper sanitation system for the septics, that would make it work. It's, I heard anecdotal a lot. It's all anecdotal. It's a matter of individual, and I've heard developers, it's gonna help the developers. This ain't just helping the developers. The developers are only doing it because there's a need. And I don't think the need, I think this lady on this conference call, I think she's correct. I don't think this is gonna be happening anytime soon due to the economy, due to what's about to take place. But at least it allows a few people who may be able to push through all the different regulations, all the different, what I call the task force of stopping progress. It's gonna come, just a matter of who has enough money to do it. And in the meantime, the people who would like to do it can't afford to do it because they don't have deep pockets like Dollar General. They don't have deep pockets, but they may have, 20 acres that they'd like to do something with, or 4 or 1. So what? Just because it doesn't fit the perception or a few people's idea of what flu they want, future land use. Who's to say? That's a matter of perspective, So, what else y'all want to talk about? Want to talk about, free choice, quiet, reasonable use of your property, those type of things are real. Property rights, they're real. And everything that y'all send up to the BOCC makes the decision. Y'all are not making the decision. Y'all not making it. It's not even on y'all. It's on them. So approve whatever request comes in here for something that expands property rights or expands use. Just approve it, send it to them, let them deal with it. I don't even, I mean, I find it hard to say some of these things because, the way I really want to say it, I have to think how to change my wording so it doesn't offend everybody. I'm like, oh, what I really want to say, I can't. All right, anyways, took up enough of your time. Move this forward. They're requesting because there is a need. If there wasn't a need, at least they have a need. And if there isn't, then they won't do it. Big deal. All right. Adios.
Thank you, Mr. Downs. Okay, is there anyone else who wishes to speak on this matter that has not spoken already? All right, we will hereby close the public comment portion of the meeting. I would like to ask staff or legal to respond to the question about why an outside agency was engaged to do this, what the need for it was, since that was brought up in the questions. So
So the county attorney's office has a budget to engage professional services if necessary. We engage professional services out of our budget because we were challenged last time we brought forth an ordinance was going to remove the prohibition against the establishment of new rural communities. So we just like we did in the Dollar General case, we engaged professional services just to assist us in the process.
Okay. All right, thank you. And for our consultant, I'd like for her to explain in detail the data and analysis that supports this recommendation. We've heard from several speakers that there's not sufficient data and analysis in this, so I'd like to hear about that.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely going to be a report with this. I understand from the county attorney's office that we're going to be presenting again in September with this data and enough.
Yes, there is a full report forthcoming, and if it's the board's desire, we can move this to the next planning board meeting to give us more time to work out the details and to address concerns that were raised today. But there is a full report forthcoming.
When you say full report, that would include additional data and analysis in the report?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's scheduled for the September?
Well, nothing is scheduled. It would be at this board's discretion to, instead of pushing this to the BCC as a next step, you'd bring it back to the planning board next month.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask, is that data primarily, though, the projected growth rates versus housing? I mean, it's kind of what she's already presented to some degree, but is there further in depth about that?
He's asking if there would be anything further in depth in the full report that's coming different from what you presented today, Isabel.
Yes, it's actually just to explain more in detail, basically how we came up with these suggestions.
This is a summarized version of the full report.
Correct.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Blackwell, please come forward to the microphone. I'll allow you to clarify.
Ms. Rogers and I were both told this was only a discussion item today. Mr. Jones told us in no uncertain terms we would only be discussing it today. So that is what we prepared, as only as a discussion item. We expect to refine what we have to say too.
Staff members, was this published as a public hearing in all of the legal advertisements?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. It was advertised as a public hearing with the understanding that the board would be making their decision today, whether they wanted to move it forward to the BCC or maintain it as a discussion item for today and bring it back to next month's meeting.
That is how it was advertised, but that is not the direction we were given from county staff, from the head of the Development Services Department.
Okay.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Rogers, come forward, please.
Jacqueline Rogers, I specifically asked for any data and analysis if it was other than the draft. And I'd say, Mr. Jones responded, "Good morning, Ms. Rogers. Hopefully all is well. These items, as you referenced, will be a discussion only. The tentative course of action will be for it to come back at the September Planning Board meeting with the data and analysis as required by the Florida statutes for the new comp plan category." And then he says, now here's the PowerPoint that will be used. I also talked to Ms. Rogers, and I don't know if I have it here, but I purposely said that Mr. Jones had said it would be a discussion item, and she said, yeah. She said something along the lines of, yes, it'll probably come back in September, and if I could find it, I can look for it real quickly. But anyway, definitely we were told that people asked me if they should come, and I said, well, it looks like it's just a discussion item.
Okay, Mr. Jones, you want to respond to that, please?
Yes.
Turn your microphone on. There you go.
Yes, it was told to me from legal that this was going to be a discussion item, yes.
Okay, so when we have a discrepancy in the advertised legal and, I guess a explanation from a senior staff member, Kia, from a legal standpoint, does that open us up to any challenges?
From a legal standpoint, we're good to proceed either way. The email that she read from Horace Jones, he did explain that this was a tentative course of action, that it'd be a discussion item. But to cover our bases, we did properly advertise it as a public hearing And even the email from Ms. Rogers, from Ms. Allison Rogers that Ms. Jacqueline Rogers referenced, she says that it will depend upon how the planning meeting goes tomorrow. That's what she said yesterday.
Yeah, she says, I suggest that it is probably going to be verbally amended to delay it to a more appropriate BCC meeting, depending on how the planning board goes tomorrow. I believe the benefit of that will be to allow for more public participation and comment prior to it coming to the BCC. So if you don't have the data and analysis, how could you make a decision today? She can put a citation, but have you seen the data? Have you read the report that she's giving to you? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers.
Can I make a proposal then to delay it?
Yes, I wanted to see if our consultant has any additional information before we accept motions on the floor.
Isabel, do you have anything additional to add before they move to the motion phase?
Did we lose her?
Isabel,
Sorry, I was on mute.
do you have anything additional to add before we move to the motion phase?
No, not unless they have additional questions. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Chair will entertain motion.
I'd like to make a motion to delay this for further data to next meeting.
All right,
Second.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rushing, since there are two public hearings, does your motion include both items 6B and C?
6B and C, yes, sir.
All right, amended second to cover both.
Second.
All right, thank you, sir. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We'll bring it back when the data and analysis is ready for review. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is a discussion item, and this is the tiny homes discussion. Do we have a staff member leading the discussion?
Good morning, board members. Juan Limos, Development Services. Absolutely, a discussion. It was, we were asked to bring this to you kind of in an ordinance format so you can get an idea of what this will look like if it was approved. At the time, it will be approved. I think everybody's got a copy of it. There was some available copies for the public in the back of the room. And we can go either way you want to. We can go page by page, line by line. Basically, staff, since the last meeting, the staff did have a sit down. We kind of review what was originally presented, what we were discussing, and agreed to certain terms and certain guidelines as it refers to the tiny house developments and how we want to
Juan, if I
address it.
could just interrupt you for just
Yes,
a
sir.
moment. Since this was presented to us in a hard copy form here, was this also provided to interested parties that may have spoken and everything? I know Ms. Crawford's here to speak on this today. Was she provided the same
And
information?
I can let her reply to that, yes, sir.
She has it. Okay, very good. I just wanted to make sure that since it came in this form, that everyone had access to it. All right.
Yes, sir.
Go
And
ahead,
again,
sir.
it's a discussion, so we are open to hear comments and guidance and direction from everyone. Do you want to speak, Ms. Crawford? or- Okay. So-
Go ahead and do your portion, and then
Okay.
we'll let her speak.
Basically, as you know, this is all derivative from the Florida Building Code changes that are proposed to occur sometime at the beginning of the new year in 2021 with Appendix Q. Basically, what the Florida Building Code, and I'm going to try to use lame terms because that's how I better understand things. What the Florida Building Code is doing under the Appendix Q, by adding a definition of what a tiny home is, and describing what a tiny home is under the standards of the Florida Building Code, they're kind of saying, okay, now that we defined, described it, and we know what it's supposed to look like, that is a single-family dwelling. That's basically what they're doing. In order for us on the Land Development Code side to be able to, I hate to use the word regulate, but kind of guide where these tiny homes can and cannot go. Of course, the Land Development Code with the zoning regulations, that's exactly what we do with all types of different uses. As this is defined as a single-family dwelling use, then there is a whole plethora of things they're going to come up with, such as, hey, I want to have more than one tiny home, or I want to develop a tiny home subdivision, or whatever you want to call it. It is, I will say, obvious for the county to try to get ahead of the pack and come up with a set of standards of what we think is needed in order to have orderly development when it comes to these tiny home developments. Again, we did have a lot of discussions. This is not formatted exactly like the regulation, like the actual ordinance would look like. So at the time that we bring this to you as a public hearing, this will be properly formatted. Again, the permitted uses, it talks about the tiny house and the definition under the Florida Building Code. That's verbatim. I did not come up with that by myself. I know I had a few calls from some individuals that don't agree with the way that the building code is defined a tiny house. I'm sorry, I do watch HGTV just like everybody else. I knew this was going to be an issue to a lot of people because when they watch that, they think a tiny home is what they see on TV. However, that's not how it is defined in the Florida Building Code. So you see the definition, again, verbatim, the same way that it is in the Florida Building Code. We have identified locational criteria by specific zoning districts on their location. So we are saying that these districts are identified as compatible for tiny house developments as permitted uses with a compatible future land use category. That's the high-density residential district, the high-density mixed-use district, the commercial district, and the heavy commercial and light industrial district. And I will tell you why those districts were identified, because under the current regulations, all those districts actually permit for multifamily developments. Under the conditional use, throughout the conditional process that is already in existence under our land development code, we identified the medium density residential as a possible district for this type of developments to be compatible with surrounding uses. We did have some additional criteria that we thought it would be necessary to reassure or ensure that compatibility. Minimum lot of 2 acres, lot area of 2 acres. We will not recommend that it will be adjacent to an actual platted subdivision. And the last one was not within 200 feet of a low density residential zone parcel. Let me regress a little bit. When we do the tiny home, again, as I explained at the beginning, when the Florida Building Code defined the tiny house, the intent was to make sure that everybody understood that this can potentially be considered a single-family dwelling under the Florida Building Code. Therefore, even though we identify these other districts as the places where we think this kind of developments can go, there is also a definition of what a tiny house development is. So once a tiny home, once you bring a site plan to the building official, and they determine, regardless, okay, so this meets the definition of a tiny home based on the Florida Building Code, to us that becomes a single-family dwelling. Per our current land development code, a single-family dwelling could potentially go on any district that allows for single-family dwellings. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if I own a property and it doesn't fall under any of these other conditions, I could potentially put a single-family dwelling on my parcel, just one. Okay, so now this regulation itself, this land development code language, what we're trying to address is not that single-family dwelling by itself on a single lot of record. What we are trying to address is the tiny home developments, and it's also defined in there, and I guess that's probably the most important thing that I skip over, is that for the purpose of these provisions, a tiny home development is a multifamily development that shall have no less than 5 and no more than 12 tiny homes on an individual development parcel. So that's really the intent of this whole regulation, is that type of development. Again, we're not regulating the single-family dwelling because we already have regulations under the land development code that take care of that issue. Again, I'll jump into the conditional use from the MDR. We spoke about that. It does have a specific design standards that we are proposing. Once somebody submit a site plan, they identify as a tiny house development. then some of those design standards will apply to it, to every single development like that. We have some land use controls. Basically, we are saying the parcels are proposed has to be a lot of record. The parent parcel will not be subdivided. Each tiny house will be connected to permanent utilities, and each tiny house will be built on an individual permanent foundation. When you look at the original definition of the tiny home on the section A under the purpose, is very, and I need to say this because this has been kind of a point that we need to make so everybody that is reading this understands that the intent of this provision is not to allow for a tiny home on wheels, such as a recreation vehicle, a travel camping trailer, a motor home, a private motor coach, a fifth wheel, a park model, or any other structures that are movable or portable. And I guess that's very important to mention. Once again, thinking back to the HGTV show, that is going to be one of those things that's going to be brought up front when somebody proposes this type of development. On the location of the developments, for the tiny home developments, we have identified it cannot be located within an existing platted subdivision. It cannot be located within the boundaries of the Midwest Escambia County Sector Plan. It cannot be located within a FEMA-designated special flood hazard area, on Perdido Key or Pensacola Beach, and areas identified as AIPD 1 and 2, or in a current or future designated community redevelopment area. Again, these are all things that staff identify as potential issues, either safety, welfare, or the health of the residents of Escambia County. And that's basically the gist of the LDC language. Again, this will be going on, we're proposing that this goes on that section as a standalone. Basically, the understanding was that we want somebody that proposes a tiny home development, instead of having to go look all over the land development code to different zoning districts, and is it allowed there, is it not allowed here, then I gotta go to the next section. Then we were gonna kind of centralize this under one section, kind of an executive summary. This is what you want to do. This is the basics of what you need to meet for you to try to make a decision. Is it really something that you want to do? And that's pretty much it. Open to your comments, and I'm sure some other people are going to have a lot of questions.
Yeah, before we let Ms. Crawford speak, just, I guess, clarification on the no less than 5 and no more than 12. How is that number established again, that's 12 is the maximum? And
In looking at other communities who have done multifamily development, of course, you can use any number, but these are some standard numbers that have been addressed, and looking at the state of Florida and other jurisdictions. These have been the numbers that they have been using for their multifamily developments in other communities within the state of Florida and outside of the state of Florida.
Okay, in one of our meetings, we had some information provided to us about a project in Tallahassee. It was very attractive looking tiny home development, and I know the board asked staff to kind of look at Tallahassee's codes, and so we could kind of see how they were doing things. Did any of these numbers appear in that, or?
And I am not sure about that. So I did look at a different, Tallahassee was one of the things. So one of the things that makes us, again, the jurisdictions that have adopted, indeed, already have adopted regulations addressing tiny home developments. And I'll use, the latest one that I saw was Milton, Florida, just down the road. What they have created is the festival that identify a specific area within the city, the town limits, where these type of developments were going to be allowed. Basically, they say, this is street to this is street to this is street. That's where you can put tiny homes. That's the only place they can go. They have to be sown a specific way. And oh, by the way, they are treated just like any other subdivision. So the idea that you get a tiny home development doesn't mean that you get standalone standards just for that subdivision because you are calling it a tiny home subdivision, or it is just a subdivision with a different name. That's basically what the town of Milton did. The city of Tallahassee, the city of Tallahassee, they created basically a district for this. Again, also they identify a specific area of the town, of the city of Tallahassee where you can put these type of developments. They basically treat it as a PUD. They have all these additional standards that you have to meet in order to be able to develop a tiny home development. I know I saw pictures of one of those in Tallahassee. It looks really nice, but it is a PUD, which is, I don't think that was the guidance and the intent that we were, I was never told that that's the way it needs to look like, so.
Yeah, I looked at it very, very carefully, Mr. Brisky. It's beautiful. It really is, but their design, their criteria, the units, the structure, their provisions are very, very high in the provisions. And we could, if this get off the ground where we may want to add some more, that was a multi-year project. Also too, it's subsidized with certain type of actions from the board as well. To make it, it's like a tiny home village where they're partnering with certain type of private partners in order to engage in the affordable housing mechanism. That's why their standards are extremely high at this time. Because it's a planned unit development where they had to go through with PUDs. You got to have certain type of enhancements, got to public meetings and public approvals and different things before the board agreed on that type of development.
And I appreciate all the research into that. I guess what I'm getting at is, and I know this is apples and oranges, but if we look at townhouses or apartments, of course they're attached, but they're driven more by the density allowed on the property, where we're putting a specific number in our provision. And is it not better to look at the density available for the property, because a larger parcel might have more density?
So I think I can answer. So, and I guess one of the biggest differences that we have with what we're proposing, the language we're proposing, is that parcel is not going to be subdivided. That makes us different. All the other things that I have looked so far. When you call this a subdivision, that means I have 10 acres. I'm going to subdivide it by, let's use 25 dwelling units per acre. I got an acre. I'm going to make up to 25 parcels, put tiny homes on them. This is not what this is. One of the requirements for these tiny home developments is that they do not subdivide the land. So basically, the tiny homes that they build either be 4 or 12, 5 or 12, depending on this language, will be kind of a lease type arrangement. So you will not really own the land. This is not for you to go down there and do a platted subdivision. That's not the intent of these things. So that's what I mentioned. When you call them subdivisions, that brings them to a completely different category, right. And the standards are completely different. Just from our purposes, for the development and review process, these are going to have to go to the development and review process. But when it goes to the actual platting of the land and creating the lots that are conforming with the zoning regulations, that this is kind of getting around that. And I hate using that word because it makes it sound like we are finding but that's just, it prevents that developer from having to create the 40-foot frontage lot that is 150 feet deep. It's just saying, as long as you meet all the zoning requirements, you could potentially put, depending on the size of your parcel, up to 12 tiny homes in one single parcel without having to go through the whole subdivision process.
We are sort of put a maximum on it, because see, and even much I found in development, the density can control as well. But we are putting, since it's a new concept for us, I went to many of my staff members and many other planners, we had a strong collaboration on this. Some warehouses used the density, then put a maximum on it. So this is just the first case. If it come with this, one of these developments will come, if it works, they say, well, we can remove that because I have more land, and let's go by the density and have higher standards. The board can go there in the future. But right now, this is such a very, 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 very new concept for the county, even statewide, countywide, nationwide. Yes, they had buses as tiny homes, but we are working with our building code. Mr. Tim Tobert is here to try to make this a little bit more regulated with certain controls, so we can help as a start in the right direction. If the board of county commissioners decide, yes, they like this, let's move forward. Let's test the waters with at least one to see how it works.
Okay, very good. Juan, are you ready for me to recognize Ms. Crawford?
Oh, please, sir, unless you
Okay.
got any other questions?
Good morning, Ms. Crawford.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing us to come and speak to you about tiny homes. I absolutely appreciate staff.
State your name and
Oh, sorry, Meredith
everything.
Crawford, 125 East Intendencia, Pensacola, 32507. So staff has been fantastic working with us. Just a few comments. I realize that this is here for your consideration, so while you're looking at it, if you would keep a few things in mind. Going through the ordinance purpose, I don't have an issue with or permitted uses, but when you get down to the location, I do think, and you know, on behalf of my client, would ask that you consider medium-density residential. There is a 10 dwelling unit per acre limitation, but you could say MDR not more than 10 units, or you could say, you know, DR, depending on what the acreage allow versus just simply prohibiting it in that zoning category. To me, it makes the most sense. You know, it's not in the low-density residential, but requiring these tiny homes, which have, you know, a much lower impact, to only be in high-density residential seems to be excluding some of the areas that would need this the most. You know, requiring a conditional use, as you know, that's a second hearing. You're going to pay an application fee. You know, the project would likely need someone here to represent them, whether it be legal or, you know, some sort of agent. So you're increasing the cost of, you know, the affordable housing purpose. And looking at the conditional use criteria, you know, not within 200 feet of LDR zoning, typically those square footage requirements or footage distances, those come in when you're looking at, you know, 1,000 feet from alcohol from a church or school, or so many feet from a borrow pit. You know, I don't know what it would be about this development that would be so incompatible with a property zoned LDR that you're going to put, you know, a limitation that if there's one anywhere in 200 feet, it would be prohibited. So, you know, we would just ask that you consider that. Same with not adjacent to a platted subdivision. You know, we have plats that go back forever. And so if it's an old plat, then is this going to prohibit it? And that, again, might be an area that really needs the infill or needs the affordable housing. So just for your consideration, design standards, very similar concerns. You know, I do agree with the comment that some of these are treated more like a PUD, and honestly, these design standards, it feels much more like a PUD than a permitted use. Again, you know, increasing the cost. Providing common tables, chairs, and benches. You know, what does that mean? How many tables? How many chairs? Can they be plastic? You know, when I went through the code to look at the language for other regulations, you know, you do a search for the word chair, and you get chairman, chair of the board, or beach chairs. You do a search for the word table, and you get table of contents, or a table as in a graph, you know, refer to table 1. So, you know, either clarify that or remove it, is what I would ask. Now, you know, my client intends to do these things, so I'm not just trying to suggest that, you know, well, not all of these, but some of these concepts, that it's a bad idea for a community, but at the same time, when you require it, you know, enforcement, limiting the development, or making the community worse. I mean, picnic tables may be great until someone vandalizes them, or there are hornets' nests under them, or, you know, and it may be less impact to have a picnic area or an open green space where you could take your blanket and have, you know, a picnic. So those are just, some of the concerns on the first page. Same with fencing. We appreciate fencing, but what trees or landscaping or some other form of buffering versus saying, every yard has to be fenced. I don't know of any subdivision that's going to require every yard to be fenced or any single-family dwelling, but you will see buffering. Land use controls, my only concern with that is the lot of record requirement. So if you, require every parcel to be, or every property to be a lot of record, then that's going to preclude someone from coming in and dividing a parcel and creating one of these. I understand that the lot of record date has been changed or is being changed, but even so, why would you limit something like this where it's otherwise compatible just based on the date that the property was created? And then finally, these location criteria. I understand the existing platted subdivision, if they're, covenants, conditions and restrictions limited, or simply because you may not want to mix the housing types like that. But when it comes to the sector plan, I realize that's a controversial area, but I don't know what it is about those 15,000 acres that would make this inappropriate throughout. I understand this flood hazard area, Perdido Key and Pensacola Beach kind of feels like a bit of NIMBYism, but those are just my thoughts. And then as far as the CRA, I had a chance to have a conversation with Clara Long, and going to get her in contact and set a meeting with we have a social worker on the nonprofit. But the CRAs, again, are areas where infill development is most needed, where affordable housing is most needed. And, limiting it when what would come in there would be a nice community with housing that can be afforded. Some of these would have community partners and social services on staff, job placement services, things like that. But again, that shouldn't be a requirement. I don't know how you would regulate it, but keeping it, blanketly out of these impoverished or blighted areas that are under the CRA just seems inappropriate. And again, or in future designated, well, what does that mean? If they say we're going to designate it in the future, then that would preclude it. Not a criticism, and I've had great conversations with staff, but these are some of the major concerns. And I guess the last thing would be all other LDC regulations will apply. I understand some of them should, but these have, much less of an impact than your standard construction. A tiny home community is not going to have the same impact as a multifamily dwelling unit of an apartment complex. And because of that lower impact, we would ask that it have individual standards specific to this, because your setbacks are going to be different. You don't need as much space for this. So just, items that we would ask that you consider. I'm so glad that you've been, open to this new idea. I'm, very thankful for your time and for that of staff. But to the extent that, these questions or concerns make sense to you, I would just ask that you keep them in mind. And if you have any questions about what we are, what we want to do, I'm happy to entertain those or to speak to you some other time. So those are my points.
Go ahead,
I was just, who are you representing? I'm still affiliating here with county attorney, I was curious. I'm sorry, I'm trying to put the pieces together here.
No, I'm always representing everyone in the community to include,
Good answer, good answer.
Exactly. Volunteer work, paid clients, county staff, anyone I can help. I am here on behalf of AMR at Pensacola Incorporated, specific to this. However, there are, I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but Mr. Reeves is involved, and I know REAP, the Reentry Alliance Pensacola, is very interested in seeing this happen. The Pride Board is very interested in seeing this happen, as well as some of the other social services and groups. So, you know, really here on behalf of everyone and for the greater good. How about that?
I appreciate it, and I think you're right. I mean, I think it's kind of it's a task for staff trying to get their arms around something, and in doing so, I think there's some encumbrances that are kind of contrary to the whole point. Just on a couple of them, but I see the logic why they went that way, but then why wouldn't you want to have it in the area where you think it would be needed or utilized the best? So,
Absolutely. So,
And I would tend to agree with Mr. Pyle, I mean, and Ms. Crawford. Staff, great job preparing the first draft here. There are some things on there I think we need to go back and look at. And I would ask in those areas that Ms. Crawford brought up, if the staff feels strongly that there's something there that needs to stay in, we'd really want to know kind of what your position was. Otherwise, you know, some of her comments were pretty direct about why we wouldn't need some of those. And I understand we want to make sure that it's done right and it's a nice looking projects, and not, you know, that's what you're trying to accomplish, but we don't want to defeat the purpose of what it is for as well. So I would agree with that.
Mr. Brisky, if I may, and we're glad that Ms. Crawford is providing her knowledge with her client. But we want to understand this too, that this is a countywide ordinance that will not only impact her client, but other interests, parties who may be wanting to develop like this. Now, with the understanding that her client may be well-intentioned to bring something real nice, but when you first start doing countywide ordinances, you gotta have certain type of controls, because you may not get a client with her potential, with her worth to want to do something nice and good for the community. So especially, for example, one of the concerns was MDR. MDR is a single family dwelling district only. It's just like LDR. The only thing it allows for much more higher densities. We have existing communities. I have a map, I don't have it with me, but I will bring it, with many parcels, many subdivisions with an MDR a zoning category, many parcels. So, and the reason why we're bringing this in, because with MDR, we also want to look at the existing zoning categories to make sure that this new use does not have an adverse impact, because it's new. Remember, it's new. And so the reason why we said, well, let's at this time, let's bring for MDR, which is a single family dwelling district, let's have a public meeting with the Board of Adjustments where they can present their plan, go through conditional use criteria, so that the public can be invited. Because right now, MDR does not allow for any multifamily development. It does not. So this will be a change. So with this, with staff bringing this, so let's do this. Let's have a public meeting where her client or whomever wants to come, talk about it, get the community, let the community be involved, so they can hear what you're doing, because this will impact them in some type of way. It really will. So that's how we just want to make sure that with this new concept and with these ideas, a minimum lot area, 2 acres, not adjacent to a platted subdivision, not within 200 feet at a low density. LDR is strictly low density area. No homes, no mobile homes, just only a single family home. And many times when we write these provisions, we try to put ourselves, if I was a neighbor, what would I think about? How would I like it? What would I think? So yes, perfect, good idea, but that's probably trying to think of it from a holistic approach. The existing neighbor, their concerns, and how can we balance that? So we're saying conditional use approval, let that be the first step, especially with MDR, since it is basically one transition up from a low density, but it's still a single family dwelling district. Yes, sir.
Let me just ask a question, and I don't want to complicate this more, but we're looking at it from the standpoint of that it's not a subdivision because it's going to be a single ownership parcel. but could we add in the provision the option that it could be a single-family subdivision or this, and there would be different standards for how it was developed?
This is to create a different set of subdivision standards to subdivide tiny homes. That will require change to the land development code, the former standards, engineering design, parking design standards, stormwater, because like I said, it's different. You'll be subdividing the
But would it be
land.
easier to push it through a PUD process on that side then, because you'd have the flexibility with the PUD?
So, and Mike,
It is, but we still have to adopt and create new standards for, the PUD is just will be an avenue for the board to consider enhancements. Let's say they want to do something different than what the requirements are, and this planning board the PUD is an option for them to bring before the board, say, take a look at these enhancements. We like these standards, but we want to do a little bit more, and we want some deviation and variations. But right now, we just don't have enough, we don't have no subdivisions standards to allow. We can create eventually, later on down the road, but it will require complete overall rewritten for subdivision control standards to subdivide these units.
Only
Small.
for tiny home subdivisions?
Only for tiny homes, yes.
Right. Mr. Pons?
I was gonna bring up the same idea, that not to make it a more financial burden by going through the PUD process, but I don't know, call it a SPUD, small planned unit. I mean, just for these, because I think what we're trying to do is almost backwards, and I think it's difficult for you guys. I get it. You're trying to legislate it for everything and for everyone who could possibly do this, whereas if we had a different control mechanism, and again, not just to add a dollar figure to the process, but if we made it part of the process specifically for a tiny home, that each one would be not necessarily for the accoutrement we're gonna get, we're gonna get some tables and chairs. That's irrelevant in this particular thing, but it's addressed like a PUD would be brought to us, because it would be different, and the PUD is usually a mixed use, where you've got 3 or 4 different types of things, and you accept it all or not. But this, I think that each one they're gonna be individual characteristics for each one for wherever they're gonna be put. I get not Perdido Keep, we got a cap. I mean, that doesn't, how do you legislate 5 equals 1? I mean, I get that, but everywhere else that Meredith mentions, I think it would be a challenge to encompass everything in one addendum. I may be wrong.
And let me add something. And in with the PUD, I mean, we could, I think it's, because we already have zoning categories that do allow for this type of use. The PUD, basically, it would be more lengthy and take more time to research, because this is new. And it may delay this ordinance from going forward, if that is the case, if that's what wishes the board. Right now, with this trend, at least we can get a test case started if the board decides, but we want to do further, taking it to the subdivision level. Then we can come back and have a much more thorough and much more comprehensive review for subdivision, because when you start doing subdivisions, it puts us in another whole final plat, preliminary plat, construction plans, road work, design, so many other things. But at this concept, we don't want the properties to be subdivided at this point. This is just trying to do a whole parcel.
Just to kind of back up on what Director Jones is saying, the PUD, we can still run through on a site plan process. If we're talking about subdividing, you gotta think now, okay, we're gonna have to have right-of-way, you gotta have the infrastructure. Now, the stormwater pond, are they gonna try to dedicate this to the public? Does the county want to accept something? You're not creating new lots if you're not subdividing. Now, all of a sudden, we don't have to worry about our regulations. It has to be on this amount of right-of-way. But if it's a PUD, great. It can still go under that site plan review. And just one other thing to back up. If we're doing a conditional use in the district, keep in mind, we're going to need some sort of qualitative criteria. instead of just, here's the standards, yes or no. We're gonna need something to provide those conditions. Just some thoughts.
All right, thank you.
Let me, I wanna kind of address some of the comments. So I wanna make sure that we are on the same, we're looking at this the same way, because I don't think you're hearing everything that I have heard. So I'll make sure that you understand what I have heard from the second that I was put in charge of this project. This is not affordable housing. You just may as well take that out of the list. Can it potentially address the need for affordable housing? Absolutely. But the second we start calling these affordable housing developments, we're going to open a can of worms, because we have federal regulations that dictate how affordable housing needs to be developed. There is requirements for these developers under affordable housing, if that's what we're going to call these. Right off the top of my head, I sit on a board where we do affordable housing reviews of development in the county, and I see this every year. There is a 10% of the dwelling units that have to be put on a specific low income level according to whatever Escambia County lowest income level is. They have to be held there for a period of 10 years. I mean, I don't know that that's what we want to do when we call these things affordable housing. So be careful with that. Are we providing more affordable housing for some people? Absolutely. That we can say that. Just I hate that affordable housing term when we try to do this, because I think that will create all kind of other issues. I'm going to address some of the location. The reason that some of those things are in there, let me start with the FEMA one. I'm a floodplain manager. It makes absolutely no sense for me to tell you that before, on an MDR lot, you had a one single family dwelling per lot. There was on the flood zone, it met the requirements. Okay, that is one single family dwelling with as many family members as you want to put in there. Now I'm going to say, you know what, forget it. We can put, let's just go ahead and put up to 12, up to 14 tiny homes in there in the special flood hazard area. That to me, as a floodplain manager, makes absolutely no sense. I don't know that I can sit down here and justify to you or to anybody what kind of thinking you will use to say, it is on an A flood zone, as long as they meet, I thought about it. Say, well, as long as they meet the requirements for the flood regulations and they build the tiny homes, whatever height they need to meet them, I'm just not comfortable with that. As a floodplain manager, as a human being, I'm thinking the reason that the special flood hazard areas were designated by FEMA is so you are conscious that when you put in a house in there, you are putting yourself and your loved ones at risk, period. So why would I allow, instead of having one single family there, have 12 different single families within that one parcel? That was my thinking about that.
Let me add to that. And this is the thing too, and we have to be careful, especially, for example, Toledo Key, Pensacola Beach, those are what you call coastal areas. And when you start using flood zone, and Tim Tobler said he's certified in M1, that make the construction costs go a little up, because you got to meet the base flood elevation. Then there's a freeboard that the county have involved, and then the structure itself. All of those things have the tendency to make construction costs go up. So is that good for these type of structures? So that's why at this point, and I researched this. So are there any other communities that put in townhomes in flood zones? In my research, I have not found one. Now there may be, but I haven't found any that are putting these in the flood zones. Toledo Key, Pensacola Beach, those are we do know that those are high volume, high areas that are prone to flooding. And we do want to be concerned about community resilience and all of those things. See, because when you start doing things like that, all those things they affect the county CRA rating. So that's why we're at this point. Let's remove these from these areas at this point in time.
Okay, very good.
Chairman? And just to finish up, so I know a lot of the comments I think we can address. I don't think it's going to be a big problem. I think there's ways to address a lot of her comments. So if that's the guidance, that's the guidance. Unless you want us to go to the PUD process, then we need to start from scratch, and that's fine too. But I don't know that was, again, and I had limited conversations.
I think just
So-
from my standpoint, I can't speak for all the board members. I'm just saying, those items that she brought up, let's make sure that we understand what the reasoning is, just like you just said, okay? I
Absolutely.
understand a lot better now what you're talking about with the special flood zone, because you explained to us why that's important to the ordinance. I mean, some of these other things, maybe there's not quite as much emphasis on them, we can eliminate them, so.
And again, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad that she had an opportunity, again, so we met a while ago before these, I guess you can call this final proposed draft. So she really didn't have the time to have another sit down with us before doing this.
Right,
So,
and we
so-
all know Ms. Crawford knows a lot about our code, so she can
Absolutely.
be helpful in that area,
I'm sure that we as a staff be more than glad to sit down and go to some of her concerns that she's got, and specifically address the concerns the board had about some, why it is in there. Yeah, that's absolutely no problem with that.
And I do want to make it clear that in any other, because see, she has her climate she got to represent. So I want to make sure that it's open, so that where y'all just catering to
right.
her, but any other interested parties will be glad to meet with
Yes.
them as well. I just got to be clear for that.
Yes, thank you, Horace. And we're going to recognize Reed, and then we do have another speaker signed up to speak as well. Go ahead, Reed.
Regarding the Perdido Key and the Pensacola Beach, naming those out specifically, I think is kind of redundant because you've already addressed the special flood zones. So because you addressed the no special flood zones, A, E, and V zones, those exclude those two areas already. Why do we need to add those two into the zone?
Hey, Mr. Reed, and I see your logic behind it, and I see you. Here's the problem, though. Again, as a common Joe, putting myself out of the bubble of the floodplain management, if you give me a FEMA map of Pensacola Beach or Perdido Key area, I promise you that you and I can find zones down there that are designated X, which is still a flood zone, however, it's a low to minimal risk flood zone. When we included Pensacola Beach and Perdido Key, we didn't know because of the flood zone designation, but because of the purpose of the geographical location of those two. Remember, those are barrier islands. If anybody ever wants to know or see what a barrier island life span is and how they morph throughout time, I'll be more than glad to show you a 20-year span of what a barrier island does. They change shapes depending on the weather, depending on the waves, depending on the ocean. The intent of those barrier islands is really, again, from the floodplain management side of the house, is to never have people living down there. But it is what it is, and we have to work what we have. However, the short story is that there is X-flood zones designated under the FEMA maps on both of those barrier islands. So I felt, and this was all me again, I felt that it was necessary that we specifically identified those two areas as places where we really don't want to concentrate development in such a manner that we are gonna just cause a big problem for everybody at the end of the day.
All right, and I'm in agreement if you believe that there are X zones in either one of those two. I was just looking at the flood maps, and I see that it's whole Perdido Key is AE or V. It's looking at the maps right now, but if you believe that there's some X zones in it, then I agree with your statement of adding those to it as excluded areas.
And I'll tell you what, for the next meeting, I will provide specific information. And if that's the case, we can absolutely discuss that again.
Okay.
Yes,
very
sir.
good.
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Bearden?
I'm not sure if I actually have something anymore after listening to all this, because when I was first hearing about these small homes, I did a lot of real estate actions in the state of Washington in the past, and the King County, they're one of the main counties in Washington, have done a considerable amount of small home developments, especially actually in the city limits of Seattle. Seattle is obviously a dirty word right about now, but they've actually created small home units where the property is a singular property and it's not individualized ownership of separate lots within the lot. And just like with condo associations or townhouse associations, the property's ran by the association that everybody pays an annual or a monthly fee depending on the cost of upkeep and everything. And all they're required to do is take care of their individual unit. When the units are attached, they take care of the interior units. When the units are separate, they take care of their own individual unit per se with regards to separate taxes, property upkeep, et cetera. But if we're talking about, we're not talking about, as was brought up, low-income units and, as they say, affordable units, it brings in a whole different ballgame. Now we're talking about someone taking, say, an acre lot, and on that acre lot, putting 6 individual small homes. We're getting into a whole new era. And I definitely understand the flood zone issue, which is very critical in that kind of situation. But we do also need to look at what's happening with our society economically, as well as potential residential and the influx of people and the low income as a result of everything that's going on now with regards to the coronavirus, the loss of jobs, the loss of incomes, property values are shifting, et cetera. And so we have to decide what is designated as a tiny home. What's the square footage of this? These are questions I'm asking because I didn't realize it was a subject. Excuse me? 400 square feet. Max? 400 max. That's actually what I thought it might be, but I wasn't sure. When we're talking about that size, normally we're talking about obviously a studio with possibly a loft in it. Studio's not really the right word, but basically it is. And then we're not discussing large families. Obviously, we're talking about 2 to 4 people max, 4 being a couple kids in a loft with a bed and a Murphy bed or whatever, how they do that, which does affect us tremendously with regards to the influx of everything from traffic to educational systems, school environments and such, as well as the needs for outside services. So this is a critical area we have to look at a little closer, I think, with regards to not necessarily acceptance, but following specific guidelines to make sure we don't put ourselves into a mess of, oh my God, what have we done? And then there could be a drastic change in everything from property values to usability, and when we start getting into the MDAs and such. So I really think it's important that we take a look at if these are being built for commerce. In other words, I'm going to build a small unit division. PUD, I think, was a SPUD. I love that phrase. I think that's perfect for what we're talking about here. Now we're talking about a whole different environment where we really need to make sure that the contractors involved in creating these things are covering these essential things that are going to be more, everything from educational costs as we increase the staff members, or not, excuse me, the personnel members living within the communities that could drastically go up per square footage to the needs of facilities in the area. So, interesting subject. And as I said, I didn't know this subject was here today. I didn't even see it. Larry dragged me along. And we were supposed to work out. He didn't work out, I did, and when we came here. And so, thank you for letting me talk. And I really appreciate the concept of the SPUD, and the input with regards to the flood zone, I think, is critical. So I think that was important, and thank you very much for answering my other question.
All right, thank you. Larry? You better put the timer on this guy, he's trouble.
No, you're giving too much time. You don't know what to say. Michael doesn't know what he's talking about. Y'all disregard everything he just said. That's that California coming out in him. He can't help it. Well, you hear a lot of things, let me be clear, listen to this, listen to that. It sounds like if everybody puts their little turn, turns the wrench a little bit, these things there's gonna be so many restrictions on it. There's gonna be so many requirements. Flood zone X is not a bad zone. I mean, I live in it. Ain't ever bothered me. I mean, I've been through real floods, big ones. He was talking about X. Okay. But anyways, like I said, you just build them up. These aren't, education. I mean, what are they gonna do? Put 10 children in there? Come on, this is not, it is gonna have a cost to it. It's gonna have a serious cost to it as we continue with the, with the regulations and the, all the different type of, precludes and you name it. It's gonna it's gonna bring the cost up. So it's not like, I don't even think this will end up being for, if we continue the way that I'm hearing the discussion go, I don't think it's gonna be for affordable at all. I think it's gonna be for, certain niche, communities, which is fine, but I don't think you should preclude the affordable side of it for somebody else, because, it's a perception. It's perception. I hear, make sure it's done right. Make sure it's done right. Picnic tables, chairs. I mean, what are we discussing here? I mean, this is getting to be too much already. And I've seen this with different commission meetings all the way to Tallahassee, DBPR, boxing commissions, everything. When all the boxing commissioners get done putting all their safety in it, all their safety, whoa, they should not have food in the dressing rooms. They could get sick. I mean, this just goes on. I've heard it all. I mean, come on, there's a certain caution. I mean, it's not the government's responsibility to provide all caution. If you walk out of your little tiny home that's supposed to be, to be affordable really, and you step in 1 foot of water when it rains like crazy back in 2014, oh, Jesus Christ, I'm in water. It's not the end of the world. I mean, at least they had a home to walk out of. All right, anyways, I could beat this all day long. And I got notes. Jesus, all right. I do need to mention one other thing. Let's try to work the other way towards, what Mrs. Crawford is talking about. If you create everything from, if I was the neighbor, man, talk about a perspective there. If I happen to have a neighbor, the county built a big giant sports complex next to me. Noise, lights, all kind of stuff. If I was the neighbor, there wouldn't be no sports complex there, and those children wouldn't be having fun. It was needed. It's not, forget it.
Thank you, Larry. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken yet that wants to speak on this discussion item?
This is just the first draft. This is
Right.
the first draft. We're gonna be working with all interested parties, fine tuning, then we're gonna bring them back for a public hearing. And I can tell you right now, I have been receiving phone calls. And it's going to, more people will show up. So that's why we must consider the existing communities as well. For any type of use, for any type of thing that we come in, we must, that's what planners do. We don't advocate for one thing, we try to be fair and equitable for the entire county.
Thank you. All right, board members, any other questions? Obviously, we're gonna send this back. Juan, great job. Keep working at it and get the stakeholders involved and, anyone who wants to have input. Anything else that you wanted to add? All right, then we'll move on. Public forum. I don't have any speaker requests for public forum. All right. I'm sorry. Where's that security guard at? Okay, director's review. Horace, I just had one, I guess, minor request.
Yes, sir.
There are times when the commission remands cases back to us for review or sends things back, and that's that's obvious, so we get it back and we kind of have direction on what they're asking us to look at. I guess what I'd like to do is, going forward, I'd like to have a report if they vote differently than our recommendation. So if we recommend approval and then they deny it, or vice versa, can we just get a report? It doesn't have to be in great detail, just maybe you voted to deny this, and they said, nope, we're gonna approve it, and, maybe direct us to, the records where we could watch the video if we wanted to, just so we can understand how it changes from when we make our recommendation through what the commissioners do. I think that's important just for us to understand, because we are only making a recommendation, and then it can change, and I think it does change quite a bit. So I think that's important for that information to get back to us. So I won't get you in trouble, I promise. I won't put you on the spot too much, but just factual reporting. You did this, they did that. Here's where you could find it if you want to watch it. I think that would be good. So.
And we will add that to the director's review. Be glad to do it.
All right, very good. Anything else for the staff? All right, our next scheduled meeting, September 1st. I'm assuming that Rachel will be taking over, sending out the request, or Kayla's probably happy that that job's going away from her. So just please remember to respond to which of these ladies does ask us for our response, because they have to know pretty early whether we're going to have a quorum or not. So anything else? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thank you.